You are listening to the continuation of the story. You can listen to the previous part via the link in the description below this video. Happy listening. After sobbing until I was exhausted, I washed myself 3 times. I pulled my hair into a ponytail and put on clean underwear, a t-shirt, sweatpants, and the sneakers I kept in my locker. My thoughts were a storm of emotions, but I coped with them and with myself. I knew one thing. It was all over with Mark. If there's one thing I don't tolerate sexually, it's violence. I have been followed in the past, and I am very sensitive to this behavior. There is a difference between rough sex and violence. Jim never hurt me. Never. That night, I told Jim I wasn't feeling well and went to bed early. The next morning, it got even worse. I was devastated and called work to report sick leave. Another day without work to please the boss. "What happened to you?" asked Jim. "I was playing sports and felt a pain in my stomach," I answered. "I'm going to the doctor as soon as I drop off the kids." "Should I stay home and take the kids to school and kindergarten?" he suggested with concern, "and maybe take you to the doctor." "Don't, Jim," I said, wanting to be alone and think. "I can handle it." "Okay, but call me or leave a message and let me know what's wrong with you." "I will, honey," I replied. I was busy getting the kids ready, but my head was filled with thoughts about what happened yesterday. Damn Mark. What came over him? I gave him what he wanted, and he repaid me with this evil prank. When Jim left for work, I was able to take the kids to daycare and then headed to my doctor. Having said that I had an emergency, I asked to be seen and found out that I would have to wait 40 minutes. An agonizing hour later, I was seen by a woman who was not my doctor. It turned out that my doctor was away on holiday. "How can I help you, Mrs. Johnson? My name is Dr. McCall, by the way." The woman looked Indian but spoke with the accent of a Southern belle from North Carolina. "Look, I had sexual intercourse with a man yesterday, and today I feel pain," I began. She wrote it down without any reaction. "And what is the discomfort?" she asked. "Well, the man, he's quite large." "Large in the sense of tall, or large in the sense of," she clarified, looking up. "Both," I replied. 10 minutes later, after examining me with instruments, she wrote down a few more notes and finally turned to me. "Here is a list of care instructions and a warning about the consequences of rough sex. Can I ask you a question?" "Certainly. This man is not your husband, right?" I froze, not knowing how or whether I should respond. Tilting her head to the side, the doctor pursed her lips and rolled her eyes. "Everything is confidential," she said, waiting for an answer. "Not my husband," I admitted. "Was it coercion?" It looked like a violent episode. "Rude, but consensual," I replied. "Did you use protective equipment?" "We got carried away and no." She made a few more notes and, still writing, continued. "You are an adult, and I am not going to lecture you about adultery, but I strongly recommend that you get tested. Contact our laboratory technician before leaving. We do everything on site. Are you taking pills?" "Yes." "Mrs. Johnson, I would advise you to find another partner or abandon this practice altogether. What happened this time can happen again, or rather, it will happen again, and the damage could be more serious." "Understood. I don't plan to see him anymore." "It's your business," she remarked. "Have you already had unprotected sex with your husband?" "No. I will prescribe you antibiotics to prevent infection. Also painkillers. You're lucky the damage isn't too serious. I'll need to see you again next week. Tell your husband that you have an infection that is preventing you from having sex. Antibiotics will be proof. If necessary, let him call, and I will confirm everything with your permission." "Yes, I allow it, but I don't think I'll have problems with my husband," I replied. She finally let me leave with the recipes and the clear feeling that she saw me as a slut who could seduce her husband. Right in the parking lot, I sent Mark a message. I just left the doctor. It was fun, but I don't want to continue anymore. It's over. Take care of yourself." An hour later, a flurry of messages from Mark began. Is it over? Why? Linda, answer me. You can't end with me. It's not all between us yet. Linda, I'm sorry, I don't know what came over me. And many more messages in the same spirit. Sometimes apologies, sometimes bewilderment. I wanted to delete them, as if that would erase everything that had happened. But I knew it was just a desire to avoid reality. Something told me to keep them. Later that day, I replied, how could you do this to me? I gave you what you wanted. And you offended me and said nasty things at the end. I want you to stay away from me. He wrote again, repeating the same apologies and disbelief. He couldn't believe that I wanted to finish everything. But for me, it was all over, the moment he crossed the border. But he had other plans. This is not the end yet. We'll talk after the playoffs. Don't make any decisions, girl. Love, Mark. I love it. What the hell? What is this talk about love? From the very beginning, I made it clear to him that this was just sex. When we started, I thought this guy was used to women jumping into his bed. I thought that by telling him about the purely sexual nature of our relationship, I would help both of us. To him, to make sure I don't become a burden. I want to be in bed with this handsome man. At the time, it seemed like the opportunity of a lifetime, but now it has turned into a nightmare. What have I done? Damn, damn, damn. On Saturday, our group gathered again for another football party, this time at Jane and Phil's. Our local team made it to the playoffs, and everyone was excited. They haven't gone this far in recent years. Most men agreed that it was thanks to Mark Lavaliere and new quarterback Sims. Only Andy argued that this was a credit to the entire team, especially the defense. Jim, I noticed, did not take part in the argument until he took Andy's side, causing a new wave of discussion. Rosie supported her husband and Jim. Such disputes were common in our company. Sometimes we even deliberately chose opposite sides to make fun of each other. I used to participate in this too, but this time I just sat silently while they laughed and teased each other. Our company was so fun, but I didn't feel anything. Thoughts of my month-long affair and its uncertain end clouded my mind. I took a moment to go out and lie down in Jane and Phil's bedroom. Still recovering, I needed rest. Jim popped in a few minutes later to check on me, but quickly returned to the game, and Dee stayed. Well, she said, closing the door, are you going to tell me what's going on? Yes, I replied, but not here. Can we go for a ride? Of course, she agreed. Having come up with an excuse that we were going to the store, we left. Jim looked at me and waved his hand. I smiled and waved back as Dee and I headed to her car. It was cold. Linda, she finally asked, what happened? And then the emotions of the last month poured out of me. I burst into tears. Dee stopped the car to try to console me. She already knew about the problems between me and Jim, and I trusted her. Without thinking, but feeling the need to share, I told her everything. Oh God, Linda, Mark Lavaliere, you slept with Mark Lavaliere? I expected this. Dee was crazy about him. Sometimes, when I was with him, I wondered what Dee would say if she saw him. And now I tell her, and she listens, but I feel that she is not thinking about my problems, but about how to end up in bed with him. Dee, that's enough. He hurt me, you know. Wait, she interrupted. You gave him yours. Well, you understand. As a gift, last week. I nodded, still sobbing. Oh, Linda, you just couldn't help yourself, could you? She said. You just had to do everything with him while you had the chance. I nodded, not wanting to admit it, but it was true. I gave myself completely to Mark not out of love, but for the sake of my pride, to know that I could, maybe even to feel better than the other women in his life. You are Eve in the Garden of Eden, right? Dee said in the voice of Yoda from Star Wars. The last time she was with us, the children adored her for this imitation. Dee, stop it, I said, trying not to laugh. It's serious. After laughing a little more, she finally calmed down and asked, does Jim suspect anything? No, as far as I know. I sleep with him too. I just take what I need. Dee shook her head. Miss Perfection, Mother of the Year, sleeps with 2 men. Lucky you. D, I'm afraid Jim will find out. Are you afraid now? I was very careful before. She covered everything. I thought Mark was the kind of person who didn't want complications. Now I don't know. The only way he'll find out is if you put it all out there yourself. Or if Mark, I still can't believe you slept with him, show up to pick you up. Take. What are you talking about, D? A hunter on the plane tried to kill another male. She again imitated the voice from documentaries about animals. And having received all her advantages, he wants to take her for himself. Di, that's enough. This is serious. Can you concentrate and help me? Finally, she stopped her jokes, but said seriously, athletes are spoiled, Linda. They are used to women coming to them themselves. He wasn't used to being abandoned before he finished. He could be a problem. I don't know what to do, Dee. The best thing you did, Linda, was finishing everything. So this is the end, right? Have you changed your mind? Yes, it's over. This bastard has crossed all boundaries. I screamed in despair, hitting the dashboard with my fists. But when I saw Dee looking at me with sympathy, I pulled myself together. Dee, I'm scared. I thought Mark and I were just having fun, and that's all. I didn't expect this. Linda, he told you himself that no woman ever agreed to do this with him, and you decided to become special, the one who will give the prince the slipper. Now he believes that you are the standard of femininity because you were able to do what others could not. He became attached to you, you know, obsessed with you, madly in love with you. How can I get rid of him? A normal man would be afraid that his husband would find out, or that his own wife would understand. You can't tell your husband. This is dangerous and stupid, but you can threaten to tell his wife. This will give you leverage. Levers, I thought out loud. But which ones? I told you, what his wife finds out is leverage. Maybe it will scare him or make him stay away. D, I feel guilty. You see, I cheated on Jim. I used to think that only other women did this, and now I'm one of them. You mean women like me? D stared at me without blinking. What do you mean? What? D, did you cheat on Dave? More than once, she replied. Don't say you're surprised. Yes, I'm surprised. Tell. Okay, D replied. I will tell you what and when, but not with whom. The last time was on Thanksgiving Day, when Dave went on a business trip. What? Linda, does your company send people on business trips during a major holiday? No, I replied, but sometimes trips are combined and... You mean when the husband goes on a business trip and the boss allows him to take his wife so that it becomes a bonus, and then they turn the trip into a mini vacation? Yes, I nodded. Sometimes. So, Dave went on one of these trips, but he didn't invite me. Draw your own conclusions. D, I'm sorry. It's okay, Linda. I deserve it. What do you mean? He caught me cheating a few years ago. Then he warned that he reserves the right to take revenge. But I think since then he's always been getting something on the side, he just doesn't tell me. I can't believe it. So you both know and tolerate it. For now, yes, I think. I don't know, Linda. The only thing I know for sure is that I was not created to be one man's woman, and it seems Dave does too. We got married too early and didn't have time to have as much fun as we should. He may say he's doing it for revenge, but in reality, he's already fully into it and enjoying it. To be honest, friend, I don't think people are even designed to be married to one person in bed. Until recently, I would not have agreed with you. But now I'm just like you. I found an excuse for myself. Oh, stop it, Dee said. You just don't want to admit it. Most men and women don't want to admit it because we've all been raised to believe in fidelity and commitment in marriage. But it's not natural, I tell you. Maybe this is normal for some of us, but not for all of us. I see the point in fidelity when a couple is trying to have children, but not before and not after. After that, silence fell between us. How could I argue with Dee if I did exactly the same thing as her? You know, sometimes I think, Linda, that all of us, all 10 people in our group, should stop pretending like we're just friends and sleep with each other's minds. Di, are you serious? She turned to me and took a deep breath before speaking. Between us, yes. She was waiting for my reaction. I was a little stunned, but not as much as I should have been if we hadn't both admitted to cheating. But I know that will never happen because those people behind the door don't know how to deal with it. They will all be jealous instead of getting what they deserve, both men and women. Perhaps, I replied. Don't say you've never looked at one of our men. They all look good, and after that conversation that we girls had when we got drunk, we know that all our husbands are fine with. Sighs, I saw you staring at Gus, and he's staring at me while Helen is looking at Jim and Dave. I bet she dreams about them. And he looks good too, I replied, laughing along with her. But like you said, that will never happen. She snorted at my comment, as if she thought things should be different. I wasn't sure. The men in our group did look attractive, but I couldn't imagine how they would behave if we all started sleeping with each other. And honestly, how would I feel about my husband sleeping with other women? Although, what kind of nervousness is there after I myself cheated on him? So, are we left to cheat and risk ruining our marriages? Dee asked, bringing me back to reality. Dee, I don't want to lose Jim. I love him. He just seems to be in a different world lately. This has been going on for 4 years now. I'm tired of waiting. And when Mark showed up, well, you know the rest. Lovers on the side must behave decently if they want to stay. I would never have tolerated what he did to you. It was fun while it lasted. But every story has a beginning, middle, and end. And you know where you are now. Yes, I know. I think it's time to go back. Now I'll imagine us all naked. I laughed at the thought. Not until you're fully recovered, Dee laughed along with me. It was the worst Christmas and New Year in years. I healed, took medication, and pretended everything was fine in front of everyone. Jim accepted the story of infection and forced abstinence from sex. He was actually very caring and kind. He did everything for me, helped me take a bath, and occupied the children so that I could rest. Jim confirmed all the feelings I had during the affair. Selfish feelings that I can have a lover and still keep my family together. But deep down I was sure that Jim, my Jim, would be there when I needed him. And here he is. But he was still distant. There was an invisible wall between us that I could not overcome. And after this novel, it seemed to me that I only strengthened it. On Christmas Day, we went to my mother's for dinner so the children could receive gifts. When we got out, I thought I saw a dark SUV that looked like Mark's car parked at the end of the street. It had the same heavily tinted windows, but he was too far away to see the numbers. I helped Jim buckle the kids into the back seat, but kept sneaking glances at what I thought was Mark's car. Was he following me? And on Christmas, of all days? As we pulled away, I struggled to see in the mirror if we were being followed. Not seeing the SUV, I relaxed a little. But this whole situation made me nervous. I felt vulnerable. The day after Christmas, Jim was home, and I had to go to work for 2 days before New Year's. When I left the office, the same black SUV was parked on the street. Once is an accident, but twice is a pattern. I turned around and asked Jim to take me to work, saying I still wasn't ready to drive. "No problem, Linda," he said happily. "When will you be back?" "I'm not sure. Probably no later than noon." "Should we go have lunch after this?" "Sounds great," I replied, taking the mirror out of my purse. Pretending to check my makeup, I glanced behind me. And sure enough, the SUV was following us. Crap, Jim dropped me off at work. I asked him to walk me to the door and fake kissed him before entering the building. At that moment, the driver of the SUV sharply pressed the gas and drove past my office. It was Mark. I saw his name numbers, 22 Markov. How original. I have a problem. 10 minutes later, they called work. "Linda Johnson," I answered. "Do you miss me?" It was Mark. "No," I replied. "I'm moving on with my life, and you must do the same. You have a family." "Don't lecture me," he growled. "And you stop following me, Mark." I answered, trying not to raise my voice, but I couldn't help it. I saw your black SUV at my mother's house on Christmas Day, and today you followed me while I was with my husband. So this is the cuckold you are married to. He looks like a total loser. What did you say? I blurted out. You heard, he said mockingly. If he had managed his responsibilities at home, you wouldn't have come to me. I exploded with anger because of his impudence, but also because he was right in a sense. Let me correct you, Mr. Lavalier, I snapped. I came to you for a little adventure. It wasn't small, was it? He was silent a little longer than necessary. Should I explain it to you, Mark? You ruined everything. Called me all sorts of names for no reason after I was generous with you, and then also hurt me. So act like a man and let me go. I'm more of a man than your husband. He snapped, but I no longer had the strength to listen to it. It doesn't concern you, Mark. So do I. I'm sure you have a list of women who are ready. So find one of them and leave me alone. Do you understand? You'll change your mind yet. You'll miss me. I know you, Linda. You don't know anything, Mark. And one more thing. What? I chose the best man. Goodbye. It's not over yet, baby, he growled and hung up. I hit the phone, trying to get back to what I was doing, but I was still excited. Despite this, I managed to work. However, by 11:30, I felt mentally exhausted and decided to leave. In the days that followed, Mark continued to call and leave messages as I was no longer answering his calls. He also sent messages to my second phone, which I kept turned off most of the time. I thought about closing this number, but decided that it might be useful and left it active. More often than not, the phone was locked in my desk and protected with a PIN code. However, I always checked messages on my work phone. I should have listened to them and deleted them immediately. Mark was persistent and monotonous. The situation with him did not subside. He called me at least once a day. This continued for the next 2 months. This was all starting to resemble the situation with my ex, Donald Snyder, who had stalked me in the past. Only then did I have Jim to rely on, and now I had to cope on my own. If Mark physically attacks me and I call the police, everything will come to light and Jim will know everything. Why do I attract such obsessive people? I didn't think Mark would ever physically attack me like Don Snyder tried to do years ago. But I also didn't think Mark would hurt me the way he did, or that he is so angry as to call me all these insults. The harassment and constant calls made me reconsider my opinion. I had already underestimated him once, and now I didn't want to be unprepared if he went further. Knowing I needed to defend myself, I signed up for a pistol shooting course over the weekend. It took time to become proficient, but I already had a concealed carry license and purchased a handgun for the first time in my life. However, I followed the instructor's best advice. The best defense is to avoid a situation where you have to use a weapon. This advice was perfect for me because by avoiding confrontation with Mark, I could keep our romance a secret. I began to carefully think through every step I took outside the house and carry a gun in my purse. The hardest part was convincing Jim of the need. After scouring the news about crimes in our area, I found enough articles to convince him that he needed to be careful. I even convinced Jim to get a gun license and buy a pistol. The defining moment for Jim was when I mentioned my past stalker, Don Snyder, who was now dead. As soon as I started talking about him, Jim tensed and stared at me coldly. This scared me, but immediately after that he agreed to all security measures. The pursuit of Mark in the SUV continued. Worried that my husband would notice, I took one of his calls to my work phone. As soon as I answered, he understood. I knew you would miss me and answer me one day, he began. Not at all, Mark, I replied. You need to stop stalking me. What are you talking about? Stop following me around in your SUV, Mark. I know your numbers. 22 Markov. It's you. Stop playing. Just come to me, Linda, he said in his polite, seductive tone. We were so good together. Mark, if my husband notices, and he will call the police. And even if the whole city adores you, Someone will definitely see this as an opportunity to make money and leak information to the press. Do you want to take risks? Are you threatening me? Evil Mark returned. Hell no, I snapped, losing patience. I'm trying to warn you. Neither of us can afford to let this get out. I don't want this, and neither do you. So leave me alone. Silence again. Mark, I understand, he said. You're right. Before I could say anything, he hung up. Since that day, I have never seen a black SUV near our home, work, or anywhere else. Our family's life continued despite the security measures taken. Work, home, and a little sex at night. But problems in this area remained. Finally, by mid-January, I told Jim that we needed to go to couples therapy or I would do it myself. I made an appointment and literally dragged him there, despite his protests. On the first evening, it all came down to retelling our problems. Jim was silent most of the time, refusing to speak while I was around. Finally, the therapist suggested we come in separately, and to my surprise, Jim agreed. When it was my turn, I told the therapist almost everything except the story with Mark. From my point of view, our problems began long before my affair, and it had no influence on it. Meanwhile, Mark continued to send messages. Sometimes he acted as if we had never separated, and sometimes he became angry. But I never felt that he was threatening me directly. The persecution stopped, but then another incident occurred that led to unforeseen consequences. It happened on Saturday morning, the third weekend in January. Temperatures have dropped sharply since a cold front from Canada arrived 10 days ago. The snow that had fallen earlier turned to ice, and then new snow began to fall, followed by another cold snap. A real winter hell, as the weather forecasters on TV called it. It was the worst winter in years, they said. But there is still February and early March ahead. But we held on, coping with the frosty mornings, taking the children to school, and driving to work and back. Jim and I continued to go to our therapy sessions, each separately. I hoped the therapist was helping Jim because there was still some distance between us. Therapy didn't do much for me because I didn't share Mark's story with anyone except Dee. So, Saturday, cold. Jim got a call. There was a flood in his building at work, which damaged some of his files. Jim urgently needed to come and pick up the servers on which the data was stored. I saw him close the lid of his laptop, put on his winter boots, and pick up his coat. I urgently need to go to work. I'll see you when I can. I'll call, Jim said as he walked, rushing to his pickup truck and driving away like a madman. After putting the kids to bed, I returned to the kitchen, where I noticed something Jim had never done before. His laptop screen wasn't closed all the way to lock it, but there could be confidential working documents there, since his company was involved in military contracts. I reached out to close the laptop, but curiosity got the better of me. After making sure the kids were occupied, I opened my laptop and looked at my email programs. There were 2 accounts, Outlook for work and a separate MSN account, Hotmail. I didn't touch my work email, but I decided to look at Hotmail. It turned out to be mostly correspondence with friends from our group of 5 couples. One letter from Gus contained a photo of a busty redhead wearing a bikini with a S flag on it. Ordinary things. Then I decided to look into the File Explorer. There were several secure folders with the names of military equipment manufacturing companies and one called Defense Department. I didn't touch them, but I looked at the rest. One folder was called MISC. It must have been an attempt to spell MISC, an abbreviation for miscellaneous, but misspelled. This immediately gave Jim away. He often made typos when he was in a hurry. Opening the MISC folder, I found 3 subfolders and froze. One was called Family and contained our family photos. The other is Resume, where Jim kept his current resume and a copy of the one he used to apply for his current job. The third folder was labeled Don Snyder, the name of my ex who died 2 years ago. I quickly pulled out my laptop and the data cable I used at work to move files between computers. Having connected both devices, I copied the entire contents of the Don Snyder folder. At the same time, I copied all the letters from Hotmail to my computer and then forwarded them to my address. After making sure that there were no traces of my actions in the sent and deleted files, I completed the process. After checking the contents of the folder, I saw many saved emails from Outlook separate from the program. Based on the dates, they were sent between the time I was pregnant with Tommy and the day Dawn died. When I opened the most recent letter, I was shocked. Hello, cuckold. It's me, the one who slept with your wife. How I love our girl Linda. What the hell is this? I never let that bastard have sex with me. We only had kisses. But at graduation, I chickened out and didn't give him my innocence. He never forgot this and continued to demand as if I owed him something. But I don't owe him anything. This freak gave me real hell with harassment and threats. Now this bastard seemed even worse than Mark. Why did he tell Jim that we had something going on with him? The more I read, the more I realized what a sick man he was. What about man? He was a lower form of life. Over 2.5 years, he sent Jim about 300 letters, each of which was more disgusting than the last. In them, he described in detail his fictitious sexual fantasies about me. He mocked Jim, calling him a cuckold, a man who allows his wife to sleep with other men, knowing about it and doing nothing. Don claimed he had sex with me, and all this supposedly happened even when Jim and I started dating before graduating from university. Lord God, no wonder Jim has changed. It hurt Don to see his answers. At first, it was the confident Jim who told Don to go to hell. But over time, Jim began to lose control. In several letters, he even asked questions about what I allegedly did with Don. I hate this bastard. Don made Jim doubt my loyalty and destroyed his trust in me. At first, I was angry at Jim for believing Don, but then I realized he was forced to endure letter after letter with these false accusations. I wondered how I would react if someone subjected me to such bullying. Poor Jim. I had to think things through, but I quickly realized what I needed to do. Jim and I need to discuss these letters, first together and then with our family therapist. We are still married. What infuriated me most was the injustice of the whole situation. How that bastard Don broke my husband's head and soul, and all this could have been prevented. The fact is that my laptop had its own folder associated with Don. There was a court order for protection, documents about the arrest, sentence, and imprisonment. Most of the work on the case was led by Police Sergeant Maya Dawson, an experienced and meticulous African-American woman and a veteran of the U.S. Army Military Police. She was incredibly methodical. If anyone could help me, it would be her. Maya left me her business card, saying that she was always ready to help if I needed it. But I never approached her because I believed that the police would not solve the problems of our marriage. Finding the phone number for the local precinct, I called and found out that Maya Dawson was now a lieutenant and on duty. After that, they called me back and invited me to come to discuss the case. I called my mother and asked her to come and look after the children. After that, I went to the police station. Lieutenant Maya Dawson greeted me with a smile and a big hug. "I remember you, girl," she said, rocking me from side to side. "How are you?" "I'm holding on," I replied. "You're holding on then? Well, well," she frowned, shaking her head. "Sit down and tell Cousin Maya everything." "Cousin? Do you have a cousin who is a police lieutenant?" "No, and I have it. I told her all about the letters Don Snyder sent to my husband and how they broke him." Maya frowned and shook her head, saying, "Oh no," and sighing heavily. When I finished, she closed her eyes, moved her lips, and pressed the cross on her neck. I sat silently until she opened her eyes. Then she took a deep breath and her face changed. "That bastard was lying." Maya shook her head. "We'll fix it." "Lieutenant." "You can call me Maya, honey. We Dawsons all call each other that." "Thank you, Maya," I muttered. "No, Linda, I should thank you. Do you even understand how much I owe you?" "Obligated to me? For what?" "Yeah, I have to, my sugar," she said with a tilt of her head and a slight smile. "I became a lieutenant because of this case. Working on it and getting a conviction helped me move forward. So yes, I am indebted to you. But now I understand that I failed in some way. What exactly? I regret that we didn't take it tough enough then. But you got him convicted, I reminded him. Oh, honey, she shook her head. This won't be easy to hear, and you may hate me for it. But I have a recording where he says that nothing ever happened between you and that he just wanted you to owe it to him. I shuddered. If only Jim had heard what Don said then. That's how I heard it. Snyder has told me the same thing several times he's run into me, I said. But what pisses me off the most is what he did to my marriage. Jim changed because of these letters, Maya. He has changed in the way he acts around me. In bed, he doesn't look me in the eyes. He behaves well in public and with children. But in private, he becomes distant. Do you understand what I mean? I can only imagine, she replied. But I think I have something that might help if you bring Jim here. Where is he now? I explained that he was at work and why. Sugar, I have important information for you. But I can only share it on the condition that you are here, since it concerns your participation in the matter. Call him and ask him to come. In the meantime, I'll go to the evidence vault to get what I need. You can sit here, go to the toilet to the left and get coffee. But know this is police coffee. Strong. Don't expect a latte or anything like that. She stood up and we hugged. I took out my phone and dialed Jim. Maya left and I waited for my husband to answer. My husband, poor man, what he just went through because of me. I couldn't even imagine what it must have been like for him to read those letters. What was it like to endure the ridicule of that bastard Snyder? So many things went wrong because of him. And because of me. Jim didn't tell me what he was going through, but I betrayed him too by having an affair. It hadn't resolved yet, and it felt like a noose around my neck. Hi, Linda, Jim replied. Jim, honey, I replied. Are you free already? I'll be there soon. I just took the servers to a secure location for the weekend. I'll sign the papers and go home. Do you know the police station on the corner of Jefferson and Vine? Yes, I know. And what? I'm here with Maya Dawson. Do you remember her from the investigation? I remember. His voice became cold. Why are you bringing this up again? Why are you there? Lieutenant Dawson says she has information on the case that we both need to hear. Can you please come over, Jim? Please? While he hesitated, I mentally repeated 1,000 prayers so that he would not refuse me and hang up. Okay, he finally said with irritation. I'll be there in half an hour. Anything else? I love you, Jim. He hesitated for a second. I love you too. See you, he said and hung up. I stared out the window for a few minutes, contemplating the chaos my life had become. Then she left the room, went to the toilet and got coffee. He turned out to be disgusting. I felt sorry for the police who were forced to drink it. I even thought about buying them a good coffee machine with a supply of normal coffee. But then a detective walked by, poured himself a cup, took a sip and smiled. Seeing my terrible expression, he laughed. I've been drinking this stuff for so long that now I can't drink normal coffee, he joked. Be careful. If you have children after this, they may be born with defects. When he left, I thought about how often I take the simple things in life for granted. This man, like Maya, faces danger every day to keep my family safe, and I think about the quality of their coffee. I returned to Maya's office and saw her at the table with a tape recorder and a box of evidence. She smiled as she sorted through the contents and pointed to the chair. When I sat down, I noticed another chair nearby that had not been there before. Found it, she said joyfully. Now we need to find the right place. Give me a minute. I watched with interest as she listened to the recording on headphones, stopping it and then turning it on again. Finally, she smiled and leaned back in her chair. Where's your hubby? She asked. He said he was on his way, I replied as the door opened and a uniformed officer led Jim into the office and then closed the door. I stood up to hug him, but he just nodded and turned to Maya, holding out his hand to her. Mr. Johnson, Maya greeted him. I'm Police Lieutenant Maya Dawson. I was a sergeant then. The Snyder case, remember? She noticed how coldly he treated me and felt awkward. It was obvious, but she still politely pointed to the empty chair next to me. "Yes, I remember," he answered briefly, glancing at me and smiling slightly. "May I ask why we are here?" "Good question," Maya replied. "I'll get straight to the point." Wanting to feel his closeness, I reached out and intertwined my fingers with his. I felt terrible about what Snyder did to him. It's terrible because of how far we've grown apart, and because I found myself in the arms of another man. But Jim didn't know this yet, and if he found out, I knew it would break him. Any hope of restoring the marriage would be gone. When Don Snyder was arrested, he was questioned briefly until he asked for a lawyer. Those 20 minutes of interviews we conducted with Detective Vaxio become inadmissible in court. He never admitted that he broke into your house, but what he said might be interesting to you. Jim glanced at me briefly, pursed his lips, and leaned forward as Maya pressed play. "Maya, Mr. Snyder, what did you want from Mrs. Johnson?" "Snyder, she owed me. I was her first. She deceived me. She teased, but never gave anything." "Maya, didn't give anything? What do you mean?" "Snyder, sex. What else? This. Bitch teased me, and then." The sound of sobs. Washio. "Don, let's be clear. You dated Linda Reed, now Linda Johnson, in 1996. Did you have sexual relations?" "Snyder, she was a damn tease, and then she just ignored me. Why does it matter whether we had something or not?" Washio. "We're trying to determine the nature of your relationship with her, Don. That's all." Snyder. "I told you so. I loved that bitch. I should have been her first. But she never let me in. And the girl of easy virtue gave it to some nonentity in college. I hate her." Mayan. "Is that why you broke into her house?" Snyder. "Go to hell, bitch. I never said I was at her house. I want a lawyer." Washio. Interview ended April 26, 2002. Jim looked at the tape recorder for a few seconds. "Mr. Johnson?" Maya asked. "Can I listen again?" Jim asked, still holding my hand. Maya complied with his request and looked at him with sympathy. During the second hearing of Snyder's interrogation, Jim's hand shook, and he shook his head several times. "That bastard," Jim exclaimed, and covered his face with his hands. His shoulders began to shake as he burst into tears. The emotion of realizing how Snyder had almost ruined his life was too much. Maya and I exchanged knowing glances. I thought about how to tell Jim what I found out about his letters. With my free hand, I began to stroke his shoulder, letting him know that he was not alone. At this time, Maya coughed to get our attention. "Jim, can I call you Jim?" she asked. He nodded, gradually gaining control of himself. "Jim, we know about those letters Snyder sent you." He turned sharply, first to Maya, then to me, but said nothing, just stared at me. Did he know that I saw them? Why did I get into his laptop? I was ready to admit everything, but Maya spoke again. "Jim, I deny any knowledge of letters outside of this room. The way I found out about them is not entirely legal, but I know, and I told your wife. Realizing how much these false letters hurt you, we decided that you both should hear the recording. Do you understand that everything he wrote to you in letters was a lie?" Jim looked at me, his lips trembling. Then he nodded, and a tear rolled down his cheek. "He destroyed me from the inside, Linda," he said. "I thought everything he said about you was true. Forgive me for not trusting you." It all boiled down to this. He never talked to me about it and didn't trust me. And in the distance that he created between us, I lost faith in him. We both refused to fight for each other. And yet, despite how low we had both fallen, he was still my man, the father of our children. He couldn't get me and hurt me, Jim. You stopped him the night he broke in. Then he turned his attention to you. And in the process, he hurt us both. Maya coughed again. "I don't want to rush you guys, but it's time for me to get back to work. If you have any questions, here is my email. Ask anytime. And I'm looking forward to being invited to dinner with my partner one evening." We stood up and all shook hands, but Maya hugged each of us. I wish I could give you a copy of Snyder's interview, but it's still evidence and I can't give it to you without a court order. Now you have a lot to discuss, but not here. If anyone's going to kiss in the police station, it's going to be us cops. But we can't do that. So go. We went home. Jim arrived first. When I got out of the car, he hugged me. "I'm so sorry, Linda," he said. "Jim, I love you immensely, but we need to go back to the therapist and work on trusting each other." He nodded in agreement, and we walked into the house holding hands. It seemed to me that my mother had the gift of premonition, because she immediately offered to take the children with her. I adore my mom. The weather in February was disgusting. Missed work and school, traffic accidents, power outages. Added to all this was an election year. As usual, there were endless political ads on TV asking people to choose the one who lies the least in the primary elections. But we held on and tried to continue living. Jim and I went to therapy together and separately. But now there was a new spirit in our sessions, a shared understanding of our past and what happened because of Snyder. We told the therapist what we found out at the police station. I still had copies of the emails and files from Jim's computer and Hotmail account, but I decided to save them for later. While Jim and I were moving towards better things, there was no point in returning to these memories. Meanwhile, Mark was still sending me messages and letters. This had to stop, and do it in such a way that there is no scene, confrontation, and not the slightest opportunity for sex. I decided that I needed to finish everything the same way it started, so I contacted Mark and laid out my terms. He agreed. Knowing that Jim worked Saturdays to make up for days missed due to snowfall, I met with Mark on Saturday, February 8th, in the mall food court. I took our children as accompaniments. Mark didn't like this and suggested we meet at the Imperial Hotel instead, but I insisted. And, to my surprise, everything went easier than I expected. Ever since I stopped seeing Mark, I expected that I would miss the spark that was between us. But after it was over, the whole experience became a sour memory for me. All my thoughts were focused on how he betrayed my trust when I decided to try something new, and how cruelly he treated me. This made ending the relationship with him easier, and I didn't regret it. Yes, it had an impressive size, but the price for this pleasure was too high. Ever since I learned about the root of my problems with Jim in bed, I realized that if we communicated better, our sex life and marriage would be much better. So I decided to give our marriage another chance. Figuratively speaking, I was back to square one again. But the meeting with Mark was not supposed to include anything like that. Our children quickly found a common language while playing in the children's area. They're so funny. There are only two categories in their life: play or no play. It's the same with adults, only instead of games, we are looking for something to get involved in. But Mark still looked at me the same way as before, and I didn't like it. "Stop looking at me like that," I pulled him back. "If not the children, then other people might notice. Everyone is used to the fact that you don't have a mustache. Put your cap down." Mark wore a baseball cap and glasses to hide his identity. The glasses were fake, non-prescription, purely for camouflage. However, any observant person could recognize him. But our meeting was just a conversation, and I chose a time and place so that he could say whatever he wanted. "I miss you," he finally said. "I know," I answered. "Are you for me, based on what we had?" "No, Mark. After it's all over, I don't miss you. I told you right away that it would only be sex. I wanted to avoid making you feel awkward about the storyboard married woman you saw me as. I just wanted to try it with you, and I liked it until you showed what you thought about me. But listen, there are a lot of married women around you who want you to turn their world upside down and destroy their husbands." I looked at him challengingly as he smirked. "I'm better than your husband, and you know it," he said. "Say anything about my husband again, and you'll be doused with my hot coffee." I answered sharply, looking him straight in the eyes. "Try to grow up, Mark. You have children, for God's sake. You've achieved your goal, made another notch on the bed. Now move on." "You don't understand, Linda," he said quietly, leaning towards me. but I moved away. You are unique, the best of them all. I want you. Mark, are you crazy? I asked in disbelief. You want us to leave our spouses, destroy our families, and destroy the lives of our children? For what? For sex? That was good, Linda. We were good together. Admit it. I was the best you had. No, Mark. Physically, and in terms of character, alas, too. If you hadn't done what you did last time and acted like an idiot by stalking my family, maybe I would have thought differently. But because of you, Mark, I started carrying weapons. Do you know what this is? Stalking. This is what crazy people do. I'm not crazy. Mark, you acted like crazy. The only reason we're dating is because you haven't completely lost your mind yet. I had another stalker in the past who stalked me for years. I know how far it can go if a person becomes obsessed. I am speaking to you now so that you do not go down this path. Linda, no one has ever left me. Never. Oh, for God's sake, Mark, stop focusing on yourself. We're not at school anymore. We are in our 30s and have children. Your football career will end soon, so what? You will live with the memories of who you were if you don't start planning for your future. He looked depressed. I still have a few years left. Maximum 5 if you don't get injured, I reminded him. And then you and Bella will live a normal life. You may have a lot of money, but children still need both parents. You have a wonderful wife, beautiful children. Why are you in such a hurry to throw it all away? Don't you see that there are men hovering around Bella too? Mark was clearly nervous. Can't we just go back to what we had? He asked. At that moment, I wondered if he really was the father of his wonderful children. They seemed smart, but their father acted like an idiot. Mark, I said, trying to reach him one last time, if you really feel something for me, please don't destroy my family. You may not take care of yours, but I take care of mine. Please don't do anything rash. Don't go to my husband and don't divorce Bella for my sake. If you destroy my family, I will never forgive you. Mark, please, let's part as friends. We had a good time, but it's time to put it behind us and move on. And one more thing you should think about. Let's say, for the sake of argument, that we left our spouses for each other. We're both liars, Mark. Unreliable people. How long do you think it will be before you start wondering where I am if I stay home a little longer? Because I'll definitely be thinking the same thing if it happens to you. He looked at me, and for a moment I thought I had reached him. But in the end, he just shook his head. I asked myself, have I wasted my time? You're throwing away something really worthwhile, Linda, he answered. I know you need something on the side. People like us always want this. Let ordinary mortals live their 9-to-5 routine with its rules and restrictions. To hell with them. I chose the fun I deserve. You may be part of this fun, but now you are going through a phase of guilt and remorse like an ordinary mortal. But you've already tasted the nectar of the gods. He nodded at me, looking around at the crowd as if he and I knew something that the rest of the world didn't. The invitation to pick up where we left off will always be open, baby. To be honest, there was a moment when his words seduced me. When he called me by his nickname, deep in my mind and body, memories of how good it was were awakened again. But I didn't reveal my thoughts and withstood his attempt to win me back. Think about what I said, Mark, I answered. Now we have to go. Where did you park? In Saks, he said. So do we. Let's go together. Let's part as friends, Mark. Getting the kids together was a real challenge, but that's what happens when kids play with friends their own age. The girls asked if they could meet again, to which the boys immediately responded with the same question. They are so innocent. Maybe another time, I answered and took them away. If it were up to me, my children would never see Mark and his children again. We parked on the west side of Saks, while Mark and the kids parked on the east side. Stopping to say goodbye, I stood next to him, and he turned to me. Take care of yourself, Mark, I said, and was about to leave, when I suddenly noticed a flash in the reflection of the shop window. Crap. In the reflection, I saw a man with a camera and a bag for equipment. Paparazzi, He was behind me and didn't take a picture of my face. I quickly grabbed the children by the hands and ran to the Saks store. After walking through several rows, I found the exit on the west side, took the children outside, and put them in our SUV. Even with the disguise, the photographer seemed to recognize Mark or suspect that it was him. I didn't bother to find out if this was true, and I didn't return to this shopping center for several months. Jim and I put the kids to bed and finally had some time together. Still far from ideal, but our relationship has begun to improve. As we hugged and then had sex, I had a thought. Jim said something one day that gave me the idea to surprise him. The next day, I went to the salon to dye my hair dark brown and straighten it. All I had to do was touch up my roots to make my new look reminiscent of Jessica Biel. Jim always perked up when he saw her in the movie Stealth. If his wife changed her appearance for Valentine's Day so that no one would recognize her as Mark Lavaliere's mistress, who could blame her? Having gone to another shopping center, I bought a blue dress that I had been eyeing earlier, new underwear and heels. Jim and I were going on a Valentine's Day date to reconnect. We've been working on this since the day we walked into the police station. But the plans were not destined to come true. The weather ruined everything, and we stayed home for the weekend, blocked by snow. The kids made us watch Frozen a million times. But we were happy, like pigs in a puddle. Mark has reduced his letters to one per week. It was some kind of progress, I suppose. But most importantly, Jim and I started talking and sharing with each other again. And not only with your days, children, or routine, but also with your thoughts and problems. The therapist explained to me how Jim might have been affected by Don Snyder's vile letters. This was already obvious, but it wasn't until Jim spoke about it in his own words that I understood what he had been through. Even then, I felt that he was holding something back. "Jim, honey, why didn't you talk to me? Why didn't you ask?" "I almost said at the very beginning," he answered as we lay in the dark under the covers. "But you were pregnant with Tommy. It made me think about things a man wouldn't normally think about." "Jim, no. Tommy is your son. Both our children, Jim, I swear. We can run tests if that makes you feel better." "I already did," he said. These were harsh words that a wife and mother had to hear from her husband. But in the end, I cheated on him, didn't I? Not when we had kids, but recently. Considering that Snyder was literally inundating Jim with letters describing what he and I were supposedly doing, I could understand why Jim was suspicious and distant. The therapist explained this to me, and now it started to dawn on me. This is what he told us about. Men react more painfully to thoughts of betrayal than women, and the idea that their wife could get pregnant by another man is their worst nightmare. Only a small percentage of men who are caught up in the cuckold lifestyle accept such thoughts and even act on them. Some men hate the idea that their wife might cheat, that another man might have sex with her, but they still get aroused by the sight or thought of it. They feel guilty for their reaction, and because of this, they withdraw and begin to hate themselves. The guilt and self-blame here are similar to what a woman experiences if her body is aroused during non-consensual sex. Just as a woman doubts herself after such a reaction, men who are turned on by the thought of their wife cheating also ask themselves questions. The female body does not understand that the mind rejects certain things. It reacts naturally. Men are visually aroused. This is inherent in nature. Beautiful woman, great car, you get the idea. So when a man sees a woman having sex, he perceives it as a picture and becomes aroused by it. If this is not his woman, he easily forgets what he saw. But if it is his wife and he gets excited, he feels guilty. The word cuckold comes to mind, and this word carries a stigma that remains with it for centuries. Real cuckolds seek this experience and persuade their wives to allow themselves to sleep with other men. But unfortunately, this term has become an insult to any man whose wife cheated on him. His wife was unfaithful, but we blame and ridicule the victim. We don't do that to women, do we? We feel sorry for her. We humiliate men, and men know it. Your husband is faced with the idea that his wife might have cheated on him. This is a destructive feeling for a man. Not surprisingly, His sexual activity changed and his confidence disappeared. You need to remind him that it was all a lie and that you find him attractive and want your husband back. The one that was before this stalker appeared. I'm not saying that you need to imitate. He will understand this and hate you for it. But tell him how good it feels when it really is. How good he makes you feel. If you love him, it will be natural. If not, it will be forced, and again, he will understand it. The weather remained terrible, but we returned to work and the children to kindergarten and nursery. I threw myself into work, trying to forget about my problems. And yes, about the damn weather. But everything I did and went through stayed with me, reminding me that every choice has consequences, and they are not always for the good. Mrs. Johnson, the secretary, called me on the phone. Someone is here to see you. Did you make an appointment for Bella Lavaliere? Oh, damn. What did Bella want from me? Were you planning to make a scene at work? Expose me? Shoot me. I'll come out now, I said, and, hanging up, stood up. I wanted to find out what she wanted, but I realized it might take more than a few minutes. And of course, I didn't want Bella discussing my affair with her husband in my office or in the waiting room. Taking my coat, keys, and purse, I went to the boss, saying that I was leaving for lunch. Bella. She literally radiated sensuality, femininity, and embodied a rare image of a real woman. Dressed as if she had stepped off the cover of a Parisian fashion magazine in high heels, impeccably styled black hair, and bright red lipstick, she seemed the epitome of style. Everything I read about her paled in comparison to what I saw when she stood in front of me. I'm Bella, she introduced herself. She looked me up and down a little longer than necessary before extending her hand. Her facial expression remained a mystery to me. This woman could have been a professional high-stakes poker player. She controlled her emotions so well. Then her lips twitched, and she gave me an almost businesslike smile. The same one that I sometimes gave to clients out of duty and not out of sympathy. Linda Johnson, I answered, shaking her hand. We women rarely exchange hard handshakes. Ours was so light that we barely touched each other's fingers, as if only because it was necessary. It's almost lunchtime, she said, as if reading my thoughts. Maybe we can discuss this over lunch. I'll even let you pay. This is how it should have been. I decided that I really owed Bella at least lunch, considering that I had been enjoying what should have been hers for almost a month. I'll lead, I answered, pointing to the exit. Once we got into my SUV, I drove to a nice but little-known restaurant that wasn't too close to my office. The last thing I wanted was for one of my colleagues to see us together and recognize Bella. So this time he chose the brunette, Bella said, turning to me. This time. These words carried much more meaning than just a remark. With this one phrase, Bella made it clear that she not only knew about my affair with Mark, but also that I was not the first. I'm not really a brunette, I answered. I am blonde. I dyed my hair and straightened my hair because my husband is obsessed with Jessica Biel, the actress. I know who it is, Bella answered, continuing to carefully examine me. You fit her image perfectly. Thank you. Mark is never disappointed in the choice of women he goes to bed with. You look better than everyone else in the last year. I remained silent, letting her talk as I drove. Why change your hair? She asked. Out of love for your husband or out of guilt? I love my husband, I answered sharply, glancing at her. He is worth that change and so much more. How nice, Bella said with a slight mockery. You realized it before it was too late. Other women in your position did not realize this and destroyed their marriages. Has he already humiliated your husband? Already? A chill ran down my spine at the thought that Mark could have turned to Jim and told him about our affair. I turned off the road and stared at Bella. At that moment, I no longer felt guilty, only threatened. What do you mean? I asked. Oh, my dear, not yet, Bella smiled, but there was sadness in her gaze. He usually starts there, but you started differently with him, didn't you? I'm not sure I understand. I talked to the children around the end of November. They mentioned that they were playing with the children of a beautiful mother with wavy blonde hair at the mall. They continued to talk about it over the holidays and recently when my husband took them to the mall again. For a moment in your office, I thought I had made a mistake. But then I saw the guilt and fear on your face. You need to learn to hide it if you're going to be a proficient cheater. Her words hurt, but she said them without malice. It hurt because I knew what I did was wrong and my conscience was still with me. Her mention of what our children talked about in their meetings also scared me. Perhaps my children told Jim about this, but he didn't mention anything. Rather, it was me who reported this, saying that I met that father again and our children played together again. Jim then smiled politely and did not comment on this. Now I started to wonder why. My detective tells me who Mark is dating and sleeping with, Linda, she continued. I want to clarify, I said in disbelief. You know about his affairs and you allow it to continue. Does this surprise you? Yes, a little, I admitted. How does this even work? Mark never said you had an open marriage. She snorted contemptuously. It was his decision, Bella answered. Not mine. But our relationship didn't start out in the most normal way, so it wasn't that much of a surprise when you think about it. What do you mean? Let's eat and I'll tell you. I'm starving. 20 minutes later, we were waiting for our order in the restaurant, sitting at a table in the corner where no one could hear us. I'm sorry, Bella, I said. No, you don't regret it, she answered with a wry smile. Why do you think that? I'm married to Mark, remember, she said. Sex with him is incredible. Even if you never see him again, you will remember this for the rest of your life. I can handle it, Bella, I answered nervously. And she was right. Sex with Mark was truly incredible. When I was with him, the whole world disappeared, along with my problems and experiences. I wondered what would have happened if he hadn't done that to me the last time. Would I continue to have secret meetings with him? Or would you focus on restoring your marriage? Or would I enjoy it enough to leave everything as it is? You will be tempted, Bella said. Get back to him. Many of those he was with returned. Even after he destroyed their marriages, he called them and they ran to him. Now he's with one of those. She was clearly waiting for my reaction. But if she expected to see jealousy or sadness, she was disappointed. I knew from the very beginning what kind of person Mark was. That's why I chose him for the novel. I knew that he had other women. This was expected. Why are you telling me all this? Because you are special, Linda. You are the first woman to leave him. The woman he's with left her husband for Mark before I could stop her. I used to get angry at women like that. I thought they deserved what was happening to them. But now I feel like I'm partly responsible for it. Why? Because I was his first. His first, I grinned. Not in the way you think, Bella waved it off, noticing my skepticism. I was his first married woman. Excuse me, what? I asked in surprise. She carefully placed the cutlery down and clasped her fingers before continuing. Mark and I broke up in college. He started chasing other girls, and I started a scandal. Instead of apologizing, Mark has completely ignored me for the past 2 months, having sex with literally everyone, including my girlfriends and my roommate. Why am I not surprised? I grinned. That's why I never got attached to Mark, and that's what made him the perfect side partner. But to put it mildly, he was not suitable for marriage. How were you able to marry him after what he did? I didn't mean to be rude, but her arrogant tone at the beginning of the conversation got on my nerves. Yes, it was a female competition, but in her gaze there was more than just wounded pride. However, at some point I felt that I was too harsh. When she looked at me, her face expressed such pain that I felt sorry for her. Sorry, I said before she could answer. She paused, as if considering what to say. I married someone else, Bella finally said. A young man who was in love with me and immediately proposed dating me after Mark and I broke up. 3 months later, we got married and moved to Dallas. I was pleased that there was a man nearby who loved me and cared about me. I tried to build a life with him. But Mark. Yes, her gaze looked away for a moment, but she quickly regained her composure. Nathan tried, but he couldn't match Mark in bed. and I was too immature to understand how dangerous it was to continue thinking about Mark. And then one day Mark just showed up and I melted. He didn't ask, he demanded that I go to dinner with him that night. And I went. Nathan didn't deserve what I did. But after Mark had sex with me, I stayed with him overnight. I didn't even think about Nathan at that moment. And Mark revealed in his triumph, he stole someone else's wife. Her story completely captured my attention. I listened without interrupting. The next day, I was so ashamed of what I did. But Mark said what I wanted to hear, that he loved me, missed me, and wanted us to get back together. Knowing that we were done with Nathan, I didn't even go home to talk to him. Instead, Mark went to him himself. "This is cruel," I said. "Why did Mark do this?" At first, he didn't explain, but I was the first wife that he stole, and for him, this became a kind of turning point in his life. The sex after that was incredible for both of us. Nathan and I got divorced while Mark was off season, and I moved in with him. We quickly got married. My parents were furious, especially the father. He sided with Nathan and considered Mark a scoundrel for what he did. But my mother understood me. She reminded Dad how she left her fiancé for him, but Dad was not convinced. He and I talked for several hours. I didn't leave Mark, but my dad convinced me to include a prenuptial agreement in our prenuptial agreement. Mark didn't want to agree at first, but Dad reminded him that he would soon become very rich, and if I cheated on him, he could lose half of his fortune. I think the fact that I cheated on Nathan made him wonder if he should trust me, so he signed. "Bella," I interrupted, "you have a prenuptial agreement and evidence of his infidelity. Why don't you divorce him and leave rich?" At that moment, I noticed how her face was distorted by pain. "There are two reasons, Linda. By that time, our daughter had already been born. And the second is that I myself created what he became. I made him the monster that he is. He is obsessed with sleeping with married women. Every woman he cheats on me with is someone's wife. It brings him pleasure." I had nothing to say. I just listened while Bella talked about her pain. My father eventually found out. He hired a detective to keep an eye on Mark. Old Dad, he tried. But I was too passionate about Mark. Let's be honest, I'm addicted. You see, Linda, I'm one of those women who just can't get enough of him. You know how it is. And he knows it. 3 years ago, he brought one of these fallen wives to my home and had sex with her in front of me. I was crushed, but we already had children, and I stayed for them. I made a deal with him. He could continue if he financed my business plan to open fitness centers. Now I have several of them in different cities, and I plan to expand. "Does what he offered you make up for what he does?" I asked. "No, it doesn't compensate. I've learned to live with it. But I don't know what I would do if Mark was exposed and it became public knowledge. I'd like to think I would have divorced him then, but I want to make sure I don't lose the kids." "Divorces are most often in favor of the wife, Bella," I objected. "But can I ask you a couple of questions if you don't mind?" She smiled and waved her hand, inviting him to continue. "Women like you." She raised an eyebrow, smirking. "Women like me? Yes, continue." "Bella, have you looked at yourself in the mirror lately? You look amazing." "Thank you, but it seems there will be some kind of but next." "More like why," I answered. "I mean, yes, Mark is good in bed, but I can't believe that you, of all women, fell under his influence. Surely men rush to your feet. You could choose anyone who would rock your world if I looked like you." "Would you like what?" I don't look like you. That's the point. Women like me. Women who are not on your level are the ones who deify Mark and fall under his spell, but not you." "Thanks for the compliment, I think," she responded. "But underneath, I'm still the same woman, Linda, with needs and emotions, and—" She fell silent. I saw the internal struggle. She tried to decide what to say and how. I waited, finding this woman incredibly interesting, far more complex than anyone I had encountered before. "Give me your phone," she said. "For what?" "I want to make sure it's off. Trust me." How do you trust me? I asked. Shut up, Linda, she said coldly. I have proof of your betrayal. Don't get me started on using them. Do what I say. I froze at the hint of her threat. No matter how civilized our conversation was, I cheated on her husband, and she had irrefutable proof. The only way she could find out about me and my affair with Mark was by spying on him. She probably had photos that could ruin my marriage. Perhaps even a video. I had no choice but to comply. Here, I said, handing her the phone. Then I wondered what else she could make me do. Turn it off and take out the battery, she ordered. It was the Motorola Razr, a fashionable phone of the time with a removable battery. She waited patiently as I followed her instructions, then nodded for me to leave the phone in sight. No, I'm not an angel who sits at home and waits for Mark to bring me the remains of your or other people's women. I also have companions when I'm away or when he's away. They may not be as good as Mark, but they give me a sense of compensation that helps me cope, and I started to like having sex with them. Mark knows. I told him and made it clear that as soon as he stopped, I would stop too. Fair enough, isn't it? I nodded, realizing that she had been waiting for this. You had another question. Ask. What do you want from me? She grinned. Fine. As I thought, you are not stupid. I remained silent, realizing that in these circumstances, it was better not to answer. Everything I tell you remains confidential. If you tell anyone, your husband will receive photos and videos of you and Mark. Understood? Yes, I whispered. She nodded. Mark has a morals clause in his contract with his team, so his affairs with married women could cost him his job. Most likely, he will simply be released, but he will lose millions. This town is conservative, and his behavior will not be tolerated here. All his advertising contracts will collapse. Until he signs with another team, we'll lose a lot of revenue. But I know him. He is addicted to this lifestyle and will not stop. Sooner or later, he will be exposed. Therefore, I convinced him to accept the offer to move to another team. There, he will be offered to end his career and remain as a coach. First as an offensive coordinator, and then possibly as a head coach. Do you understand this? Yes, I answered. My father and husband are football fans. I know something about it. Okay, then let's get to the point. Our lawyers and Mark's agents say they can negotiate a contract with a vague morals clause. This is California. What else can you say? I nodded, playing her game, although she could see that I still had questions. Chief among them, what does she really want from me? Now about you, Linda. You may think that you don't measure up to my level of attractiveness and beauty, but you're wrong. I know the modeling industry, and I can confidently say that I will get you a job at an agency tomorrow. I highly doubt it, I objected with disbelief. I have already contacted the agency that works with me, and they agreed. My company doesn't just target young women, Linda. Our strategy covers clients from adolescents to 50s. This is the concept of a healthy lifestyle that we promote by showing women from every age category as an example. Women who not only keep fit, but also look like role models. Young mothers like you in your 30s are ideal for this. I have already selected other models for this line, but I hope to introduce you as one of them. And yes, to answer your question, having no modeling experience is actually a plus. We need real women who want to be healthy, fit, and look good in our sportswear while working out. This will be your part of the job. At first, I will need to discuss this with my husband, I answered. How nice. Have you discussed with your husband whether it's worth sleeping with mine? She asked coldly, looking at me intently. No, you didn't, so you'll have to find a way to convince him. Besides, what man wouldn't want to be married to a model? I'm sure Jim will be delighted. She knew so much about me. When she mentioned my husband's name, a chill ran through my body. But there was more to it than that. She spoke about him with such familiarity, as if she knew him personally. Yes, Linda, I know more about you and your husband than you think. If I think you need to know, I'll let you know. For now, just listen. I sank into a chair, feeling completely defeated. When we leave town, you will have to leave your current job. You're wasting your time there." I tried to object, but she raised her hand to stop me. "When Mark and I move, you will get an offer to manage my local fitness center in addition to your modeling duties. The compensation for both roles will be more than double what you earn now. And this is just the beginning. You'll get a signing bonus and other perks, like a new car every 2 years. I plan to expand this market by opening 2 or 3 more outlets in the suburbs, perhaps one in the city center. I believe in the principle of keep your friends close and your enemies closer. I do all this for insurance, to make sure you don't even think about following Mark and me. This is your first option. Are there more? Yes, another one. You may decide that, even with everything I offer you, you will want to leave your husband and go to Mark when he proposes to you. What offer? I don't know exactly, to be honest. But I know Mark is fascinated by you, so much so that he is ready to jeopardize everything that we have created with him, and even custody of our children. He's not thinking clearly, Linda, but whatever his decision and however you react, I want the choice to be made according to your will. How can I make a choice if you are blackmailing me? Am I blackmailing you, Linda? I'm just giving you options. If I go to Mark, you will tell my husband what I did and ruin our marriage. No, Linda, you misunderstand. If you choose Mark, you are the one who will ruin your marriage. It will be your choice. Why are you willing to risk me choosing Mark and taking him away from you? Because if he decides to leave with me rather than stay here for you, then he chose me. And I want you to make your choice too. If my husband chooses you and you choose him, I will get my answer. And it will be easier for me to divorce him. It will hurt, but I can handle it. What if I choose him and then he leaves me? Who knows, Linda? I'm not a fortune teller. All I know is that I want options for myself. Either Mark chooses me or you choose to stay with your husband. In any case, I will know, and knowledge will give me the freedom to move on. Bella, he might cheat on you again in California. You must understand this. Bella flinched at my statement, but continued speaking. Mark can do it, but it won't happen to you, Linda. She answered, if you decide not to follow him and stay here, there should be distance between you. The terms you enter into with me will be binding. I'll keep an eye on you both. If you meet again, your husband will receive information. Do we understand each other? I had no choice but to agree and consider the options she offered me. Yes, we understand, I said. When are you and Mark leaving town? He will be playing in California next fall. And remember, if you take this to the press, your husband will get photos and videos. You understand? If you accept my offer and then go to Mark anyway, your husband will find out everything. This is your only warning. Depending on what you decide, we will either meet again or not. All my offers will remain valid as promised. Agree? I agree that I have a choice, as you put it, I answered, holding out my hand. This time Bella shook it without hesitation. You can pay the bill, she said. I don't need transport. My bodyguard and driver will take me. And only then did I notice 2 men in suits at the next table. They stood up as Bella stood up. One of them, the shorter one, handed her a coat and helped her put it on. This is my personal number, Linda, she said, handing me a card with a name and number. Call me as soon as you make a decision. And with these words, she turned and headed towards the exit. A taller man walked in front, then she, and behind them a second man. I sat there, stunned by what I heard. Having come to my senses, I collected my phone, called the waitress, and paid in cash, leaving a generous tip. The ride home was a nightmare. Bella's words spoken today, Mark's last phrases in the shopping center, and the meeting with Maya at the police station flashed through my head like a whirlwind. I felt like my life was finally in order. But 1 hour with Bella and everything turned upside down. I needed to get home quickly and be among what gave me comfort. The house, the silly knickknacks on the shelves, my cracked coffee mug, my children who love me unconditionally, and my husband who patiently shares life with me. Is something wrong, honey? Jim asked as I hugged him tightly. Not anymore, I answered. I held him as if this could be the last time. Bella's implied and direct threats scared me to the core. No matter how beautifully she talked about choice, I felt trapped in a trap of my own making. We had just finished playing with the kids in the living room before they went to bed. This evening ritual became part of my recovery journey. At this time, my phone rang. After looking at the caller ID, I turned to Jim. This is Dee, I apologized, indicating with a gesture that the conversation would be short. Jim rolled his eyes, and I couldn't help but laugh. He got up and took the kids to bed while I chatted with our mutual social butterfly. And what was that? He asked when he returned. Well, dear husband, I answered with a grin. I know what you're thinking. This terrible February has already gone on too long. I'll drink to that, he said, reaching for a glass of wine. I grabbed his wrist, stopped his movement, and put his hand on my waist with a smile. It's much better this way. We have been complaining for so long that this is the worst February in the history of mankind, and now we have to endure an extra day of this horror. Dee came up with a great idea. This extra day is Friday. What if we all got together, hired babysitters for the kids, had a great dinner, then danced a little at a nice club, and then got hotel rooms for the night? This way we can go a little crazy and not have to worry about going home and end this terrible month on a positive note. How will we get from the club to the hotel? Will you have to go? Asked Jim. That's the point, Jim. Do you know the Madison Hotel in the city center? We ate there, remember? There's a club a block away where Dave's colleagues go. There will be live music on Friday and admission is free if you eat at Madison. Oh yes, Phil and Jane have already arranged for Mrs. Porter to look after their children for the night, and she said ours will be fine too. I need to think about it. Jim answered as if thinking. I knew Jim was hoping that I would use my feminine charm to persuade him, but instead he got hit on the head with a pillow. I've known him for a long time, and he probably should have known me better. Okay, he said. Let's do this. But there is one condition. Which? I was wary. You're going to wear that dress you bought for Valentine's Day, and I still haven't seen it. Your desire is my law, I answered, trying to sound hoarse. Of course, he knew about the blue dress, but I wouldn't have to persuade him for long. After all this winter blues and stress, I also wanted to go out and dance in this dress with him. Being a couple again, having fun with friends. This time Dee actually came up with a great idea. Each couple went into their room to leave their things. All 5 couples lived in the same corridor. The rooms were nearby. With a restaurant and club within walking distance, we didn't have to worry about parking or who would be driving. The mood was great. Jim was straightening his tie in front of the mirror, and I appeared in a blue dress. Oh, baby, he exclaimed, looking at me so that everything inside caught fire. Jim and I have been on a high ever since we learned how Don Snyder ruined our marriage and put that nightmare behind us. We still went to marriage counseling, but we were doing so well that we didn't see ourselves there for a long time. He reached out to me, but I leaned over. I'll fix my lipstick in a minute, I said. But the dress is not so simple. Be careful. Can I lift it up? He asked with a mischievous smile. Oh, damn, of course you can. Just be careful. There was a loud knock on the door. Jim and I rolled our eyes at the same time, but he was the one who opened the door. Dee and Dave burst in screaming loudly. Are you ready for the party? Dave exclaimed, winking at me and giving me a thumbs up with an exaggerated smile. Dee, wearing a tight red minidress, twirled in front of Jim, making him blush. For a second, they exchanged a strange glance that struck me as curious. But then Jane, Phil, Helen, Gus, Rosie, and Andy burst into the room. Men in suits, women in colorful dresses. Yes, we discussed and coordinated outfits. Dee in red, Jane in gold, Helen in black, Rosie in silver. They all showed more legs than me. But mine were better. After some small talk about how everyone got there, how glad we were to spend the evening, and other trivia that people usually exchange before going out, we headed down. Madison was crowded, but we had a reserved table. Neither of us ate too much. We knew from experience that it was uncomfortable to dance with a full stomach. After dinner, we went to the Morrison Club. There was also a reserved large table waiting for us there. We ordered drinks, but soon realized how pointless it was to try to talk in such a noisy place. We ended up resorting to hand gestures or shouting in each other's ears. Everyone was laughing and having a great time. After a while, we all went out onto the dance floor, forming our own small circle. It had been a long time since we danced like this, but soon everyone started changing partners, except for Dee and Dave, who were clinging to each other too closely all evening. Jim chuckled and rolled his eyes at them. I know Jim often says that Dee annoys him, but I've noticed the way he looks at her more than once. Although, to be honest, he looked at all of our friends at different moments. We all did it. As Dee once said, when we confessed our cheating to each other, the men in our group were a feast for the eyes, and we girls were also on top. We might not have been stars of the first magnitude, but when we got together, got dressed, and went out, we looked amazing. We attracted the attention of both men and women. After dancing fast dances, we returned to our husbands for slow songs. Again, Dee and Dave ended up with each other. I had to talk to this girl and find out what was going on between them. When the music ended, Jim and I went to the restroom and then headed to the bar for drinks. Being able to drink without having to worry about driving was great, and we all had a little too much to drink but stayed relatively sober. "Are you having fun?" Jim asked loudly in my ear. The music started playing again. "Yes," I shouted back. "Let's eat some wings and then dance again." Now, having danced together, we began to dance in pairs, sometimes with another spouse. To avoid problems with strangers, we had an unspoken rule: no dancing with people outside our group. Most quickly realized this. Our men never invited women who were not part of our company to dance, and did not accept the invitation. After several attempts by strangers to leave us alone, we enjoyed the evening. Jim and I ate wings and kissed while sitting between Phil and Rosie. At that moment, we heard a noise from another table and then a muffled whisper. "It's him." "Hey, isn't that Mark Lavalier?" Phil tried to see him through me. It's him," Dee squealed, throwing a sly look at me. To most people at the club, he was known as a sports star, a volunteer for charities, and an ambassador for many brands. Mark was a media figure surrounded by an aura of virtue. Men admired him and women idolized him. But I knew what was hidden behind this mask. Everything went cold inside me, and I prayed that he wouldn't come. "And besides, he's handsome," Dee continued her comment, making me want to strangle her. Men discussed his sporting achievements, and women discussed his appearance. I struggled to control myself. What the hell is Mark doing here? I calmed myself down mentally. My hair was dyed dark brown and straightened. If I turn my head and cover my face with my hair, he won't recognize me. I turned to Jim, praying that this nightmare would go away. To distract myself, I leaned over and kissed my husband. "Hey, you too," Andy shouted from the other end. "Get yourself a number." At this moment, the music started playing again. "Shall we dance here or in our room?" asked Jim. "He's coming here," Helen said dreamily, like a schoolgirl in love with a movie star. I glanced over and saw Mark leaving his table and heading straight towards ours. He was dressed to impress: a dark gray sharkskin suit, a silk shirt, and a metallic blue tie. For a second, I thought about getting up and dragging Jim into the room like he suggested, but I didn't want to attract attention. "Walk past that brunette in a blue dress and go away," I repeated mentally, trying to make him leave. But he came and stood next to Jim and me and said, "Hello," holding out his hand to me. "My name is Mark. Do you want to dance?" To say that I wanted to fall through the ground at that moment is to say nothing. This damn bastard came straight towards me. Did he know who I was? After all, he had never seen me in this dress and with such hair. Or is this an accident? Maybe he asked me to dance without knowing who I was. But the likelihood of this was negligible. And if I refuse, he will make a scene. How do I explain this to Jim? Under the gaze of everyone present, I let go of my husband's hand and stood up. My small hand disappeared into Mark's big one as he led me to the dance floor. At that moment, I knew how sappers felt when clearing a bomb. Any wrong move and everything will explode, destroying me. Relax, Jim, it's just a dance. I heard Jane try to calm my husband down as Mark led me away. Hang in there, Linda. Just hold on. I repeated this over and over in my head as Mark and I started dancing. I needed to tread carefully. If we dance a couple of fast songs, I can switch to a slow dance, and then I can try to get him to calm down. I forced myself to smile, sometimes looking at Mark and then looking away. He had a smug expression on his face, like a man who had won, but I knew that, for now, he was in control of the situation. He danced well, and I just tried to keep up. I remembered Mark saying that dancing was a passion for him and that it helped him coordinate his movements on the field. When he moved his hips, I forced myself to look anywhere but at him and tried to act amused. The music changed and a slow melody began to play. Mark pulled me closer, showing everyone his victory, and I allowed him. This gave me a chance to talk to him. Only he spoke first. After this dance, I will be waiting for you at the back exit next to the toilets. Just say you're going there and come. I want you for tonight. Are you crazy, Mark? My husband is here. He is looking at us. Please don't ruin my marriage. I beg you. Find another woman and forget about me, I whispered pleadingly. I want you, Linda. You won't be disappointed, he said, reminding me of the very words he said in November before our affair began. That won't happen, Mark, I answered, forcing myself to smile even wider. The song will end soon. I know you will come. If not, Our conversation consisted of short phrases between movements and turns. The song ended faster than I expected. Now I was forced to smile politely and return to our table. Seeing the anxiety in my husband's eyes, I tried to reassure him with a smile. But she knew that everything was far from okay. Mark will be waiting at the back door, and when I don't show up, he'll come back and make a scene. Crap, crap, this bastard. I always said that you are the most beautiful woman here, Jim whispered in my ear as he pulled out my chair. I tried to concentrate. Should we continue dancing in our room? Oh, Jim, my dear Jim, how I have failed you. I don't want to leave you here and go to him. But I have to. If I don't go, our world will collapse today. Sorry, everyone, but I have to go to the toilet. Linda, will you come with me? Dee said loudly, interrupting my thoughts. My hands were shaking as I let go of Jim's hand again. Sorry, Jim. I need to freshen up too, I said as if in a fog and stood up. The look of disappointment on his face will remain etched in my memory forever, even years later. What are you doing? I asked Dee as she grabbed my hand and pulled me towards the hallway. But Dee didn't answer. She just dragged me into a dimly lit corridor where there were toilets on one side and an exit on the other. I noticed that one of the guards was holding the door open and Mark was standing next to him with his imposing figure. You have come, he smiled. You won't regret. Now that I was no longer under my husband's gaze, I didn't hold back. You'll regret it, Mark, I interrupted him sharply. I don't know how you found me here and knew it was me, but all this shit ends now. I won't go with you. What is it about the word end that you don't understand? Baby, he began, trying to calm me down. Shut up, Mark, I lowered my voice, finally attracting his attention, and said directly to his face, I'm not going anywhere with you. Never. I'm returning to my husband. And if you try to destroy my marriage, I will destroy your life and yours, you bastard. You have a prenuptial agreement and Bella will ruin you in court. And there is a moral clause that you seem to have forgotten about in the contract with the team. If you tell my husband what we did, I'll go to the press and tell everything. Do you understand? His lips moved, but he said nothing, digesting what he heard. How do you know all this? He asked in shock. It doesn't matter. What matters is that it's true. I said, you could ruin my marriage, but if you do this, your life will collapse too. Decide for yourself. We stared at each other, with Dee and the bouncer as witnesses. Nobody wanted to give in, but someone had to. "Please, Linda, come with me." "No, I won't go," I said and stepped back. At that moment, the great Marc Lavaliere, a professional player, smashing the enemy's defense, a hero and a womanizer, looked at me like a lost boy. "I'll go," a familiar female voice rang out. The bouncer, Mark, and I turned around. "I'll go with you," Honey Dee said, pressing her chest against Mark. He looked at me one last time, then lowered his gaze to Dee, or rather, to her breasts, barely restrained by the low neckline of her red dress. Mark looked at me one last time, expressing disappointment and then challenge. "Went," he said, his lips curling into a smirk, and Dee smiled at me. "Dee, what about Dave?" I asked as they walked out the back door, which the bouncer immediately closed. "Goodbye, Mark," I whispered more to myself than to anyone. And then I turned around and saw Dave and my husband approaching me. "Everything is fine?" Jim asked anxiously. "And where's Di?" Dave asked, looking back at the door to the ladies' room. "Is she there?" "No, Dave, she's not there," I answered. "Where is she?" he asked again, looking at me, then at the bouncer, and then at the door. "She was wearing a red dress with a low cut," the bouncer clarified. "Yes, where is she?" Dave almost started screaming. "She's gone," the bouncer said, nodding toward the door behind him. Dave tried to go to the closed door, but the bouncer blocked his path with a menacing look. "Where is my wife?" Dave turned to me. "Why did she leave?" I had to tell. There was no point in hiding. She left with Marc Lavaliere," I said. "People," the bouncer intervened to get our attention. "You are blocking the emergency exit and toilets. Move the conversation back to the hall, preferably to the bar." "I want my wife," Dave said irritably. "Where did he take her?" "Sir, on behalf of Morrison," suggested the bouncer, "let me treat you to a drink at the house's expense." "Fuck the drink," Dave said, and tried to go to the back door again. But the bouncer stopped him again. Jim stepped between them, turning to Dave to prevent a fight that he would probably lose. "She left with that bastard you danced with, right, Linda?" Dave pointed an accusing finger at me while Jim held him back. What could I tell him? That Dee will be okay, that she will return tomorrow and everything will be as before, that she will remain the same. Will their marriage continue as if nothing happened? It would be a lie. Dee could come back, but she wouldn't be fine or the same. I knew Mark. For him, she was just a consolation prize. And Dee and Dave's marriage will never be the same. For the rest of his life, Dave will remember how his wife left the club with him to sleep with the famous athlete, humiliating him in front of his friends. No marriage can withstand such humiliation. So I said nothing, hanging my head in shame. Shame that this is all partly my fault, and guilt because I was glad that Dave, and not Jim, was experiencing those intense feelings of betrayal, jealousy, and rage. "Let's go back to our table," Jim said, dragging Dave back, with the bouncer now looking at me. "I won't tell anyone what I heard if you take your friend out of the club or calm him down." "Fine." "Thank you," I said to the bouncer. "We'll do it." "Do you know how many women he did this to?" the bouncer asked, shaking his head. I didn't need to know. I could imagine. Mark had an obsession with married women and seducing them. He probably ignored serial cheaters, focusing on first-time cheaters for the thrill. I noticed how the bouncer was still looking at me with contempt. For a moment, I thought that this man could also destroy me. Does he want something for his silence? Everything turned into a nightmare. But he seemed to understand my thoughts and shook his head in disgust. "I don't need anything from you," he said, crossing his massive arms over his chest. I nodded curtly in gratitude that he had chosen to remain silent. I am grateful that there are good men in the world, better than Mark, and much better than me. Within minutes, the bouncer saw me for who I am, a cheating wife trying to salvage what's left of her ruined life. When we got back to our table, Dave was angry at everyone, blaming us all for his wife running off with a famous athlete. Jim tried to calm him down, but Dave was adamant. "I'm done with her," he shouted. "She cheated on me for years. I thought we had everything settled, and she left with this overrated hunk. I'll leave her." "Well, Dave," Phil tried to intervene. "This is Mark Lavaliere." "So what, Phil? If that asshole left with Jane, would you say that too?" "I would like," Jane muttered, staggering on her heels. She was drunk and could barely stand. "Let's go, dear," Phil said, supporting his wife. "Our wives are women of easy virtue," Dave continued, looking straight at me. "You helped her run away with him, Linda. I will never forget this. It was all a setup, right? And Dave is a fool." "Dave," I tried to calm him down. "Dee decided everything herself. I didn't plan anything. I just danced with him." This attempt did not help. Jim, Gus, Helen, and Andy began to laugh at my remark, which angered Dave even more. He attacked Jim. "You wouldn't find it funny if Linda went with him instead of Dee, would you?" Jim stopped laughing and looked at me, his gaze filled with doubt and embarrassment. Then he returned to Dave with an apologetic expression on his face. "Sorry, buddy. I think we all drank too much. Yeah, it's a shitty situation, I agree. Let's take you to your room." "Fine." "Fuck off, Jim. Get rid of everything. Especially you, Linda. You helped her. I know it did. Dancing with him was rigged. What kind of friends are you, huh?" Dave was drunk and just venting his anger, but there was still some truth in his words. I was indeed involved, although not in the way he thought. Mark came to the club for me, not for Dee. When I rejected him, Dee decided to seize the moment. Crazy girl, but her action distracted Mark from me and saved my marriage. As I watched Jim and Phil support a drunk and depressed Dave, I realized again how lucky I was. Jim could have been in Dave's place, and well, I knew what Dee was going through right now. It was an unbridled pleasure that I knew all too well. But more than 2 months have passed, and the memories have begun to fade. Jim and I started making new memories, those for which I am not ashamed. When we woke up the next morning, Dave was not in his room. In the room he shared with Dee, all his things were gone. All that was left was Dee's small suitcase and black underwear in the trash that smelled of urine. Great gesture, Dave. Jim and I packed Dee's things and brought them to us. The road home was quiet. After everything that had happened, neither of us were in the mood for jokes. "Linda," Jim finally said, looking ahead as he drove. He asked you to go with him first, while you were dancing." Jim wasn't stupid. He realized that something had happened. I couldn't tell him about the past, but I couldn't lie about Mark's offer to go with him. He would know that I was lying. Husbands are not as stupid as wives sometimes think. It's one thing to do something behind their back, where they can't see anything. But it was quite another thing to lie when he himself was a witness. "Yes," I answered. "I thought so," he said. "Why didn't you ask me this last night?" "I wanted to, but I needed to think. I realized that something happened while you were dancing. And when Dee left with him, I knew he asked you first." Now everyone calls Mark he. The name Mark Lavaliere, which once made the men and women of our company proud, has now been tainted. It has become a dirty word that adults avoid saying in front of children. "I'm staying with you, Jim, if you still want me." While you were sleeping, I looked at you and thought how happy I was that you were still around. How happy I am that you are mine. We're both lucky, Jim. No, Linda, let me say this. I doubted you after Snyder's letters. I let it get into my head instead of talking to you about it. How much time have I wasted? How much damage has it done to our marriage? I knew that my husband was partly to blame for our problems, but he didn't deserve to suffer even more after everything Snyder did to him. "Jim," I said softly, "enough. We may blame ourselves for what we did or didn't do, but the fact is that it has already happened. We cannot change the past. All we can do is move on and learn from it." He nodded in agreement, but I saw that something was still tormenting him. When we got home, it was about 11 in the morning. We brought our things inside, but left Dee's suitcase in the trunk. Around noon, we picked up the kids from my parents and took them to brunch. They were happy to see us, and the feeling was mutual. There was a moment of silence at the table as we ate. Jim glanced at me and smiled. I answered him with a nod. I was where I wanted to be. My choice was made last night. The day passed in peace. We returned home, played with the kids, and had a cozy family evening. But after everything that happened, I couldn't relax. I knew there was more to come. Late in the afternoon, the doorbell rang. I was closest to the door, so I went to open it. Looking through the peephole, I saw Dee. She stood in the doorway, looking tense and still wearing the red dress she had worn the night before. When I opened the door, she looked at me, took a deep breath, and spoke. "Dave changed the locks on the house. Can I come in?" "Certainly," I answered, opening the door wider. Dee walked into the house, took off her shoes, and sat down tiredly on a chair in the kitchen. "We brought your things from the hotel, except for your underwear," I said. "What's wrong with him?" Dee asked, pouring herself a cup of coffee. "Dave threw it in the trash and then urinated on it," I answered dryly. "How romantic," she snorted, taking a sip of coffee. Meanwhile, Jim entered the kitchen. "Hi, Dee," he said. "Did you manage to visit home?" "I tried," she shrugged, "but Dave locked the house." Jim and I looked at each other. He then raised one eyebrow, looking quizzically at Dee, who seemed to have no remorse for her actions. "We brought your things here," I repeated. "Thanks, guys," she replied, stretching so that her chest puffed out slightly. "You know, I barely slept last night. Do you mind if I take a shower and sleep a little at your place?" Jim looked at me, waiting for my answer. "Go to our bedroom. I'll find you a t-shirt, a towel, and yoga pants," I said. "But I sleep naked," she said with a mocking smile. Jim chuckled, but didn't say a word. He was looking at his phone screen when his face suddenly became serious. "Dave put your things in bags by the door. He texted me to come pick them up before he threw them away. I'll go and talk to him now. I'll be back in an hour." "I'm sure he'll want to talk it out," Dee muttered, heading to the bathroom. While Dee was in the shower, I texted Bella. "Linda, the decision has been made. I refuse Mark and accept your offer." Her answer came quickly. "Bella, wise choice. I will contact you." Laconically and without unnecessary words. She didn't ask anything about Mark. I guessed that she knew that he was at the club last night, and most likely he left with Dee, who was now taking a shower in my house. After checking that the children were okay, I returned to the bedroom. My son Tommy ran up to me and climbed onto the bed, sitting comfortably next to me. I hugged him, enjoying this moment, when Dee entered the room, wrapped in a towel. Her hair was still damp, and her expression was content, even somewhat smug. "Did you have a good time?" I asked. "You're the last one who should be asking me this, Linda," she replied with a grin, drying her hair. "How did you even let him go?" "It was easier than I thought," I said. "He hurt me. Do you remember?" "Oh, he hurt me. Nice," she cooed. "Aren't you worried about how Dave is doing now?" I asked. She stopped, thought for a few seconds, and shook her head. Wrapped in a towel, she sat on the bed next to me and ruffled Tommy's thick hair. Her look at my son was clouded with sadness, but immediately replaced by a smile when she tickled him, and he laughed. "I think I should thank you," I said as Tommy jumped off the bed and ran out of the room. "It's not worth it," she replied. "It was worth it. You saved my marriage," I continued, "and probably destroyed yours in the process, Dee." She leaned over and unexpectedly hugged me. "You and Jim are worth it, Linda. My marriage to Dave is a disaster. We ruined it by hurting each other. We got married too young. Neither of us had time to have fun before the wedding, and then we made up for it by cheating on each other. And while I'm jealous that you have children, I'm glad Dave and I didn't have any. It made last night and the upcoming divorce easier. Are you sure that everything can't be fixed? After last night?" She chuckled and then smiled tightly. "No, Linda, Dave and I are done. I realized this a few weeks ago when I started planning our trip to the club. I know you suggested going, but did you plan this week in advance? For what? First of all, I wanted a piece of Markel. Did you know he would be there? Where? I made sure he was there. You did what? Calm down, Linda, Dee said. Let me explain. You brought him there knowing that I would be there too? I asked. That's why he recognized me. You told him what I would look like, that I changed the color and style of my hair. Damn it, Dee. What's wrong with you? Listen, she said, waiting for me to calm down. You used me as bait, I interrupted her. What if I left with him? I knew you wouldn't do this. Although for a few seconds I was still worried that you too would leave after that last dance. Dee chuckled again. Stop joking, Dee, I said, moving away from her. You put my marriage on the line. He was there to get me to leave Jim. Do you know how close he came to this? Calculated risk. But you pulled it off and did what I expected. Did you expect it? Why do you think so? Linda, it's me, your best friend. I've known you for many years. You were taller than Mark. Besides, you love Jim and the kids. I don't see you changing them. Not to mention, this guy is an idiot. Did you say he has children? Yes, two, the same age as our children. I hope their mother knows what she's doing because Mark has only one thing on his mind. He kept saying, I'm better than your husband, over and over again. He almost ruined everything with this crap. I know, I said. I had to put him in his place. I told him that if he insulted Jim again, I would end it. But he found something else that made me leave. Did you contact him before last night? When? When what? When did you first contact him? Don't make a fool of yourself. Dee didn't seem bothered. Throwing off the towel, she put on the clothes I gave her. Calm down, friend. I found it on the internet back in January. It said that he often dined at the same restaurant in the city center with friends. I set up surveillance, and when he went inside, I called out to him, saying that I was Linda's friend. You mentioned my name, I exclaimed, shaking my head. Just the name, friend. Don't get angry, she said, continuing her story. Mark stopped, turned to me and said that he had a meeting, but he could call later. But I saw his interest. You are incredible. Listen, I just wanted to know what it was like to be with a guy like that. But I didn't get mine right away. He was busy. I think he thought he didn't need me. He thought you would give in. But when you didn't give in, Mark seemed to get desperate and contacted me. This happened before you met the kids at the mall. And you didn't tell me anything. I should kill you for this. Calm down, Linda. You told him to get lost, and I slept with him. Everyone is happy. Anyway, we're members of an exclusive club now, you and me, Dee giggled, lying down on the bed and straightening out her pillow. It's not like he'll ever call back. And that suits me. I got everything I wanted from him. Please tell me you made him use condoms. Dee nodded, hugging her pillow. Can you do a couple of favors for me, Linda? Which? I answered, not knowing whether to hug her for saving my marriage or whip her for putting it at risk. Give me a couple of days to live here until I get up the courage to tell my parents that I need to go back to them. And the second? Let Jim wake me up in bed. Fuck you, Dee, I said, leaving the room. Oh, you're cute, but Jim is a man, she said, laughing. You are incorrigible. The last thing I heard was her laughter as I closed the door. It took time for the events of that night with friends to fully unfold. The choice I made when Mark asked me to dance affected many lives. The Lavalier family, Dee and Dave, and ultimately my own husband and children. I never expected to see Mark at the club when we went dancing. It was a real shock. After talking to Bella, I thought Mark would make his move to get me. But I assumed that it would be a call or, at most, a request for a new meeting. After his dance trick in the club, I already expected anything from him. It's time to take the initiative and not let him dictate the course of events. This was the question I pondered as my life suddenly returned to normal. It's hard to believe that after all this upheaval, any good things have happened. Although not only, to my surprise, Mark did not make himself known again. But other events distracted me. For example, Dave filed for divorce from Dee, and she was served with a summons right at our house where she lived. It happened on Saturday morning when our whole family was having breakfast. Jim opened the door, and the court courier asked to call Dee to hand over the documents. Dee returned to the table with the papers and continued eating her bacon and eggs. Jim and I looked at each other, but tried not to make the situation even more awkward for her. "Are you okay, Dee?" Jim finally asked cautiously. "I expected this," she said, sipping her tea. "I have to ask," Jim said. "You and Dave looked so in love that night. But a minute later you left with another guy. Why?" "I knew that if everything went as I hoped, this would be our last night as a couple," she answered. "I had to free him. The toughest method is the most effective, so Dave leaves on his own and won't linger." I noticed that Jim didn't like her attitude, judging by the way he was trying not to roll his eyes. But he remained a hospitable host, allowing Dee to stay with us, despite her quarrel with her mother on the phone. Her parents were extremely unhappy with her decision to divorce Dave, but Dee was adamant. "I still love him," she said, "and probably always will be. I'm just glad we didn't have children." "But you like us," Tommy interjected, sitting in his favorite place next to our guest. "I love you, baby," she said, hugging a smiling Tommy. "You are the only man I need." Jim chuckled quietly as he watched his son's head press one of Dee's breasts against the other. I also couldn't help but laugh, seeing my boy's happy face. But what intrigued me most was the look of my daughter, Emma. Her eyes ran from one of us to the other, and I saw how she remembered everything. My little girl watched, learned, and grew. Even at 6 years old, she began her journey into adulthood by watching us. Dee lived with us for 2 months before moving into an apartment near us. During her stay, she almost became a member of our family. The children adored her. Jim, however, kept his distance from her, and it seems to me that he was glad that she was leaving, not only because of the stress associated with a long stay as a guest. I think she made Jim feel uncomfortable with her constant sexual innuendos and the way she wore shorts or low-cut tops. At another time, I would have reprimanded her, and maybe I should have done it. But the truth is that I felt indebted to her. By rejecting Mark at the club, she prevented a scandal that would have exposed my affair with him to my husband. I was convinced, and still am, that Dee saved my marriage that night. Although she claimed she did it for selfish reasons, I didn't believe her. I remembered our conversation during the broadcast of the playoff match. Then she mentioned something about distraction and how I could gain some advantage. Now I'm willing to bet that's when the idea first popped into her head. It was all about how she embodied it later. "Linda," Dee said right before she moved into her apartment, "we need to talk." Jim took the kids to my parents. He usually stayed there to chat with my dad, so Deep and I had plenty of time. "You're probably wondering why I'm making fun of your husband right in front of you." The thought really did occur to me, Dee. "I understand that I owe you, but sometimes you go too far. Are you doing this to annoy me? Because you know about my affair and think that I'm afraid to contradict you?" She leaned back on the kitchen table and looked at me with a serious look. "I'm doing this to punish him," she blurted out. "What?" I asked, confused. "For what?" "Sit down, Linda," Dee said. "We need to talk seriously." Something told me that I wouldn't like what I was about to hear. "Your Jim is not a bad person, but he's not perfect either." "Go on," I said, feeling a chill along my spine. "Some time ago, I accidentally overheard a conversation between Jim and Dave when he was visiting you. Dave told me how he caught me cheating. The details were pretty nasty. I understand his reaction, but it is hypocritical, given that he himself was having an affair with a colleague at the time." I didn't interrupt her, although Jim never told me about it. This was news to me, and I listened with growing curiosity. At some point, their conversation turned to the topic of women from our company. They started talking about which of us they would like to sleep with, Dee continued. "Dave said that if he had the opportunity, he would start with you." "No wonder," I replied. "He constantly stares at me, like everyone else, just like us. What does this have to do with my husband?" "Well, when it was Jim's turn, he told Dave that I was first on his list." "He said it," I exclaimed, stunned. "I've never heard Jim discuss any of our friends that way. We once joked about this topic, and I asked him who he considered attractive among our friends. But he laughed and said that he was not so stupid as to answer such questions. Then he asked me about my favorite, but I also decided not to answer, and we stopped there. And what else did they say? When Dave just laughed and said that he would be glad to switch, I almost flew in there to cause a scandal for both of them. But then Jim added something that surprised me. He said that you acted wild with some other man and never admitted it to him, that he was angry at you for it, and that you deserved to see him have sex with someone else. I think he meant me. I've been teasing him ever since. This is all? I asked. I expected to hear something more serious. But this explained Jim's attitude during that difficult period when Snyder sent his mocking letters. Linda, she continued, this time with unexpected sincerity in her voice, it hurt me to hear Jim talk about me like that. Because I've always respected you too. Of all the men in our company, your Jim was always the one I dreamed of, about which I thought, I wish I had someone like him. Dee was silent for a moment and then spoke again. Do you remember that conversation when you first told me about you and Mark? Yes, I remember. Remember how I joked that we should all stop pretending and just sleep with each other openly instead of stealing glances and beating around the bush? Yes. Now, if we really did this, you and Jim would be the first ones I would choose to exchange partners with. I'm flattered, I replied with feigned jocularity. But inside I was seething with anger that this woman had spent so much time in my house, seducing my husband. Why didn't you tell me this before? Would you let me into your house if you knew that? She asked. After he said those things about me, I was hurt. What I would have gladly given to him with your consent now seemed dirty and spoiled. Do you understand, Linda? That's why I teased him. I punished him for thinking that way about me. Her words sounded sincere, as if Jim had truly heard her. But I wasn't there to hear it all for myself, and I couldn't just believe her story. I sat and thought, deciding whether I should believe her or not. Dee, if I find out that you lied to me, that you slept with my husband under my roof while you lived here. Linda, I swear, she said, trying to take my hand. Why should I lie? I don't know, I answered, withdrawing my hand. Why are you telling me this now? To justify my behavior to my husband? To laugh at me because you know about my affair? No, Linda, she said, shaking her head. I'm telling you this so you know why I was angry with Jim and teased him. Yes, he hurt my feelings, but it's not just that. He killed my hope that we could become closer with his words. Instead of cheating, we could have fun, openly and consensually. I shook my head at her reasoning. Don't shake your head, Linda, Dee said. You have no right to judge my thoughts after what you yourself did. How have our betrayals led us to the better, eh? I looked at her and thought about how easily I myself went over to the side of deceivers, liars, and traitors in order to have fun with Mark. To raise my self-esteem by giving myself the pleasure of meeting the stud that I thought I deserved. Oh yes, I had reasons and excuses. Do you know why I left for Jim? I answered sharply. I tried to talk to him, tried to understand why he became so withdrawn and turned into a shell of himself in bed. I gave him 4 years. 4 damn years. When Snyder started stalking me, I told him everything. She was honest. I told him how this guy was obsessed with me and wouldn't give me peace. I didn't hide anything. But Jim retreated into himself for reasons he never explained to me. For what reasons? Now I know what Jim's reasons were, and they seem reasonable. But, Linda, what happened? Not wanting to go into detail, I gave her the short version. But she didn't tell me about the letters she found on Jim's laptop. Only Maya, the policewoman, knew about this. Feeling she owed it to me, Maya covered for me by telling Jim that she was the one who discovered the letters. During my pregnancy with Tommy, and for 2 years after that, Jim received nasty letters from my stalker Snyder. This continued until the bastard died. What letters? Snyder made up stories about how he and I allegedly had sex for years. Crazy sexual fantasies that confused Jim. He didn't tell me anything and thought it was true. Crap. Dyer recoiled. It's horrible. No wonder Jim was in such a state. Does he know that you found out about this? Yes, he knows. We go to family therapy. Plus, I won't go into detail, but Jim now knows it was all a lie. That Snyder made it all up to hurt him because he couldn't get to me. Dia didn't say anything, just looked at me. Then she shrugged and shook her head. Linda, I know I should feel for Jim, but by not talking to you, he ruined everything. He put you both on this path. 4 years of such torment and not a word. If he wasn't supposed to talk to you, then who? Maybe he was talking to someone after all, and they were just silent. I don't know, I answered. We discussed this issue in therapy. Jim says he didn't talk to anyone because he was ashamed. I didn't tell her that the therapist had mentioned the possibility that the letters might even arouse Jim, or that thinking about another man might somehow affect him. See, Dia answered, shaking her head and pointing her finger at me. Because of this lack of communication, my marriage fell apart and a huge crack appeared in yours. I wonder how many other marriages and relationships fail because we don't dare reach out to loved ones who are there for just that. You are preaching to the already converted Dia. We both looked at each other, realizing how much chaos our lives had become and the mistakes we had both made. Linda, she finally said, if you love him and want to save the marriage, you can't tell Jim about Mark. I listened to her, but was confused. What if he finds out Dia? What then? You can't control it, she replied. And if Jim finds out, it won't be from you. And it's better. Why, how can this be? Because, she answered sharply, I did so. My conscience was tormenting me, and I confessed to Dave. She looked away, wincing at the memory. Her lips trembled. I was so stupid, Linda, she said, and a tear rolled down her face. Such a stupid and selfish woman. No, back then I still thought like a stupid girl. I felt that by telling him, I would be freed from my sins. But instead, I just hurt him. Not only did I cheat, but I also threw it in his face. Oh my God, Linda, I saw this pain in his face and realized that it was too late. By that time, she was crying her eyes out. I could only hug her. If I hadn't told him, she continued, if I had stopped cheating and lived with my guilt, we wouldn't have destroyed our marriage, Linda. When he found out, he decided he had to take revenge and made stupid mistakes himself. After that, everything went in circles. She sobbed inconsolably. All I could do was hold her in my arms. Linda, she finally said, you shouldn't repeat my mistake. You have to promise me. You can't fix what happened to Mark. Confessing to Jim won't fix it. Maybe he'll find out. Or maybe not. But if he doesn't find out, you can save the family. Yes, you have problems that need to be addressed, but admitting to cheating with Mark will only add fuel to the fire. She was right. Over the weekend, while we were helping Dia move into her small apartment, it was announced that Mark was moving to California. Our local fans, including Jim, thought he had sold out. In their opinion, he still had 2 years to work on his contract, and they expected him to keep his word. He's just another selfish jock, Jim said, turning off the TV. Of course, I understand. The 49ers offered him a ton of money and a coaching opportunity. I would also agree, but no one offers me millions for my work. He laughed at his own joke, and I smiled back at him. But inside, I was in seventh heaven. Mark and his family were leaving. However, soon you will have to pay the bills for this. Maybe it's for the best, Jim said, bringing me out of my thoughts. What? I asked again. Sorry, I was lost in thought. I noticed, he chuckled. As I said, maybe it's good that Lavalier is leaving. To say a chill ran down my spine would be an understatement. I wanted to look away from Jim's smiling face. Do you remember how he asked you to dance? And how did he offer you? How can I forget? I answered, knowing that if I turned away, he would take it as guilt. But I refused. Well, they say Dia wasn't the only one who said yes. Unlike you, who resisted his magnetism. He said mockingly after pausing too long. There are rumors that he did this more than once. That was rude, I replied, remembering how Mark asked me to dance. As soon as the slow dance started, he offered to go with him. Not wanting to make a scene, I was polite, but I was very nervous afterwards. I noticed, Jim said confidently, still looking into my eyes. Were you at least a little seduced then? I smiled at him as he grinned back. Of course, I pretended to gasp. After all, this is the great Mark Lavalier, a gift to all women. The prince is in his own dreams. How could I not think about it? And Jim continued without looking away. He maintained my playful mood, but I understood that in reality he was interrogating me. He simply didn't have the facts to pin me against the wall. Well, I'm sure the promised evening would be amazing and incredible. But it would also change my whole life. In what sense? He asked, leaning closer and playing along with my impudence. But although I looked cheerful on the outside, inside I was filled with fear and anxiety. If I agreed, I would be destroyed, disgraced, used and thrown away, and not only for them, but also by you. How could you take me back after being violated by another man? Jim shook his head, still smiling. I don't know, Linda, he said, thinking exaggeratedly, and then turned to me again. I mean, it's Mark Lavalier, is it true? And I'm just a pathetic mortal. It hurt me, because that's what Mark called people who, in his opinion, were inferior to him. Pitiful mortals. You're not pathetic in any way, I said, sitting on his lap. You are my man, my husband, father of our children. You are special to me. Am I special, Linda? He asked seriously. I know that. I failed you in the past. I didn't trust you. And I should have. You had your reasons. I had reasons to be angry and doubt what Snyder was saying, Jim replied. But I had to come to you. I just couldn't. I let him get to me, get into my head and manipulate me. I pulled him closer, resting my head on his chest. This was more than he had ever talked to me about outside of therapy. Did it help that you heard the recording where he says it's all a lie? I asked, tensed internally, hoping that this would help. It really seemed to help as we grew closer and regained the intimacy we hadn't had since Tommy was born. But there was still a long way to go until complete recovery. Yes, it helped, he replied. I was so angry at Snyder, but then I got angry at myself. I'm still angry at both of them, and at him for doing this, and at myself for allowing him to influence me. But yeah, finding out it was a lie, it helped. Mostly, I still have some problems. Which? I asked, looking at him. Anything I can help with? The therapist said that until we talk about it, it will hang between us. This will be one more thing I didn't tell you. Okay, I'm listening, I replied, settling down on his lap. Oh God, he was excited. His embarrassed grin said it all. It was classic Jim. Can I wait? I asked. You know, until we figure this out? Children. The kids are okay, Jim, I said, pulling him along with me. I want to do this in the bathroom. Upstairs? No, I answered, dragging him into the corridor. The one here. It's too small, he objected, referring to the size of the bathroom. No, not little, I said. Exactly the next Monday after the announcement of Mark's deal, a package of documents arrived at my work. It contained Bella's company brochures, legal documents, and a letter from her. Dear Linda, you made the right choice, just as I hoped. And as I promised, I will keep my end of the deal. Tomorrow morning, you need to come to the B-Fit office at 9 a.m. sharp. At that time, there was only one office in the city. Now there are 4 of them. I helped launch and organize all 4 of them. All 4 are profitable thanks to my great employees and managers. But where did I stop? There will be meetings with our lawyers, staff, and the agent who will handle your modeling contract. Be prepared to spend all day there, Linda. This is the next stage of your life. Oh yeah, and bring your husband. I want to meet him. He would only need to stay for a few minutes to get acquainted, and then he could return to his work. Do it, Linda. Bella. Honey, we need to talk, I said when I saw Jim that evening. Jim tensed. No man wants to hear this phrase from his wife. Jim was no exception. Do I need to drink for this? He asked, raising an eyebrow. Not yet, I answered. Maybe later. It was therapy day and the kids were with my parents. We took advantage of this to make dinner while we talked. So, what happened? He asked. Do you remember how I signed an agreement with a recruitment agency in March? It was a trick. Cover. I signed with this agency at Bella's direction. Once I did this, my profile was sent to just one agency client, Bella Lavaliere, CEO of BFit. Yes, sure. Did they find something suitable for you? Actually, yes. Have you heard about the BFit company? Sounds familiar, but just tell me. The founder of the company is interested in my skills and wants us to come to a meeting tomorrow. You will only need to stay for a short time, but I will spend the whole day there. Is this serious? He asked. Between managing the branch, planning expansion, and other responsibilities, I was offered a starting salary of $100,000, plus a signing bonus of $30,000 and a car. What? Jim rolled his eyes. This is almost twice as much as you earn now. I know, I said with a smile. Jim, we can do a lot with that kind of money. Start a college fund for kids, buy a better house, buy you a new pickup truck. Well, I hit the patient the car, he joked, shaking his head. We laughed together. So what do you mean by other duties? He asked with slight apprehension. Sometimes you will have to travel to San Francisco, where the company's headquarters will be located, but not often. Also, I need to discuss with you one part of the job related to the modeling contract. Model contract? Do you mean advertising for a store? No, Jim, I mean real modeling work. Linda, he began with a smile. Say it again. Is part of your job to be a model? Yes, this is part of the company's marketing strategy. The CEO and some of the company's executives are involved in modeling themselves. The idea is that the management lives this lifestyle and does not just advertise and collect dues from club members. Lifestyle? Yes, work out in BFit gyms, buy fitness clothes in BFit, buy sports supplements, go to nutrition classes. Do you get the idea? Understand. So will you be modeling these clothes? I think these will be the company's sports collections, and also something not related to BFit, to promote the image. For magazines, for example. Yes. Look, don't get me wrong. I think you look great, but isn't that what they hire hungry 20-year-old models for? No. Modeling is often aimed at age groups. There are also models in their 60s. Wow, Linda, I don't even know what to say. How about supporting me and going with me tomorrow? Will I be late by an hour or so? Something like that. Jim called his boss to make arrangements and hung up and looked at me with a smile. So I'm married to a model. I squealed and jumped into his lap. We had another quick number before therapy. During the session, the therapist said that we could come once a month as our relationship began to improve. The children stayed overnight with my parents. Mom and Dad were happy to help, and I was happy when Jim made love to me. The next morning I had to prepare my husband. Jim, you need to know who my boss will be. I'll meet her, right? He asked, tying his tie. I chose a suit, shirt, and tie for him. Jim always looked good in suits. All that running and gym work was clearly paying off. But his taste in clothes left much to be desired. He's an engineer. What else can I say? You need to know who she is and be careful what you say. I don't want to lose this job, Jim. I promise not to leave my fly unzipped, he replied with a mocking grin. That's not the point. And who is my new boss? I said, seeing his puzzled look. And who is her husband? Well, for God's sake, Linda, spit it out. By the time you say so, the kids will have already graduated from college. We should be there in an hour. Her name is Bella Lavaliere. Jim looked at me blankly. At first, then the corners of his lips began to rise. And then, when he was already smiling completely, he laughed. Then, unable to bear it, he burst into loud laughter. Jim, this isn't funny. I started, but he leaned back on the bed, continuing to laugh. Stress and nervous tension took over, and I also laughed with him. We laughed for a long time. Then they tried to calm down, but again lost control. On the way to the interview, We were hit again. Beware of the laughter cycle, you know how it goes. To be continued. Subscribe to the channel and click on the bell so you don't miss the next part of this story. She will be there very soon. The link to the sequel will be in the description of this video below. Subscribe to our channel so that your love doesn't cheat on you, and go ahead and listen to the next story, because this story is nothing compared to the next one. If you're under 18, don't even think. Click to the next one. 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 Click to the next one.